failed us. And if you're not angry about that, Michael, and any of you out there, then you're damn wrong, because you should be angry. Young Turks.
But it was genuine. He was mad.
Cenk Uygur, known online as one of the Young Turks, isn't afraid to throw some punches.
3, 2, 1, fade up.
Cenk the Turk Uygur.
What kind of TV station is this? The whole point is for me to yell and scream and tell you what I think.
It was right out of like Wayne's World.
This guy on this little rinky-dink website is speaking truth to power.
We've been averaging 600,000 views a day, beating most of the cable shows in America.
We're the largest online news show in the world.
We're celebrating our 1 billionth view.
Television, we're coming.
More politics ahead with Cenk Uygur.
He knew that the MSNBC opportunity was an experiment.
A fill-in host beats CNN and headline news combined. At some point, they want to give me a show.
Every single year, that comes out of our paycheck. We put it in, and you're saying we were suckers.
When you, as a host, tells someone you're interviewing to shut up, that's going to raise a red flag.
That guy needed a tall glass of shut-up juice.
If President Obama's doing the wrong thing, I'm not going to tell you that he's doing the right thing so I can, quote, support him.
He says to me, "You won't believe the meeting that I just had."
The head of MSNBC talked to me.
They want him off the air.
Cenk took an incredible risk.
We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media. The Democrats and the Republicans are here to screw you. And who on the air is saying it?
I wouldn't have done what he did.
That if I'm going to be a talk show host, I should be the biggest talk show host in the country. I don't think anyone else does it better. I don't think anyone's even close.
Before you know it, I'll be back on your TV doing a national show. I guarantee it.
We talk about TYT Army being so strong. Usually they help us run our show. Now they're going to help us run the country.
Like this!
It's time that we reclaim democracy for the people.
We had a huge victory for Wolfpack.
When Lincoln said this was a country by, of, and for, he said of the people, not of corporations.
Our representatives don't represent us. Whoa! Democracy!
United! We are! We are! Too strong!
There's thousands of volunteers, and you could be among them. When you get the power back, oh, that feels good.
This is just the beginning.
Knock, knock.
We're coming for them!
Wolf-pack.com.
Mayweather will knock out Pacquiao. Floyd beats his wife.
Okay, I get it. You're progressive. You're looking for other progressive voices. Why? Because you want real progress to happen. You're tired of the why, regular stuff. You should be checking out the Young Turks. Why? Because who else is going to have Killer Mike talking about politics and social issues in his new TV show, Trigger Warning?
My dad wrote the story of his life. It's called The Original Young Turk. It's a book on shoptyt.com. Part of the story is how I became progressive. Now, he doesn't write about that per se, but in his life story, you see, oh my God, when a community helps one another, when the government also chips in and gives you free education, anything is possible. He went from an incredibly poor olive farmer to living the American dream.
Hello, and welcome to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. Today, our episode is about sex work, and it's about sex workers' rights. Now, as you know, every day on this program, we talk about a different aspect of the Green New Deal. And you're probably sitting there going, Josh, what does sex work have to do with the Green New Deal? Well, we're going to get into that in a moment. With my two guests, who are brilliant advocates, also practitioners of sex work, Elle Stanger and Merrick DeVille. And they're with us tonight in just a moment. But I want to talk about this because it is a subject that makes most people who deal with politics run screaming far, far away. And I know a lot about this. When I first became a political advocate in the mainstream media, when I was dealing with fracking, when I was dealing with the oil industry, when gasoline came out, and I was thrust into the spotlight to be a legit scientific reporter who was talking about the oil industry and talking about how fracking was terrible and destructive. It was clear to me that I had to do a lot of things to my personality and to myself if I wanted to maintain credibility, if I wanted to be seen as a serious person. Thank God that was 10 years ago. And thank God things have changed quite a bit, both in terms of the acceptance of anti-fracking science, but also in terms of the way we discuss sexual mores, sexuality, and all things about sex. Let's be clear. The porn industry makes more money than the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball combined. They make vastly more money than Hollywood does. It is a constant presence in American life and in global life. And we're not talking about it. We're not talking about the things that exist in that space at all. And not talking about sex or being puritanical about sex or being patriarchal about sex or talking about being possessive or ownership society or jealousy with respect to sexuality and sex is part of that suite of values that we can call patriarchy, we can call extractivism, we can call colonialism, we can call fascism, we can call male chauvinism. But when we talk about feminism, when we talk about nurturing, when we talk about the environment, when we talk about all the ways in which openness as a part of our value system, we have to talk about sex work, we have to talk about how these things operate in our lives. That's why this show is so important to me in this discussion, because I think we cannot talk about the Green New Deal or the future of the world without talking about justice. And we can't talk about justice if we're not talking about feminism, if we're not talking about how we treat sex workers, if we're not talking about how we treat our sexual attitudes and our sexual mores. So I want you to celebrate this moment, celebrate how in America today, talking about sex work, talking about behaviors that are outside of the norm, or what we call the norm. I don't even really believe it's the norm. But talking about sexuality in every possible way, in every possible permutation along that spectrum, is accepted, and we must continue to fight for those rights. And so to have a discussion on all these things, I welcome my guests, Elle Stanger and Merrick DeVille. Thanks both of you for being on today. My first question, I guess, is how do we define sex work? How do you define sex work? And how is it mischaracterized and how is it mistreated right now in America and the world today? Either of you can start.
So I don't know what a formal definition of sex work would be, but I define it as the sexual related labor for goods or services, usually money. So this can look like touch contact in person. This can look like real-time digital contact. Adult entertainment is something that is related to sex work, but isn't always sex work. So if I'm dancing go-go on a stage, that's arguably adult entertainment. Is it sex work? I don't think so. I mean, it's peripheral, but sex work is an umbrella term for many different types of labor. And that can look like for fun, for money, for survival.
Okay. Merrick, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. As far as misconceptions, I would say that most people don't understand that. When you say sex work, most people, especially older people, tend to think that you're talking about full service. And that can be really off-putting for a lot of people.
Yeah. So for someone like before, and I'm so afraid of horror. I've done full service. I've done so many types of sex work. I've never had to work like outdoors sex work. I've been lucky to like find clients and work inside their homes or mine. But it's interesting the respectability politics that'll come up with sex workers too. Yeah, you're nodding, where you'll see even the stigma impacting the workers themselves, where they'll try to justify it, like, well, I'm not a porn star, I just sell pictures, or I don't do, webcam, I just dance. And
we, in some circles, we call it the hierarchy. There's definitely a hierarchy. Yeah, you'll talk to dancers. So I was a dancer first. That's how I got into this. I started dancing when I was 19 years old. And like Elle, I have also done full service. I've done all kinds of forms of sex work. I really like that you actually said that just now, because you never really know where it's going to go, even with other sex workers, because there are a lot of girls who have done full service who will never say it. They won't even tell other girls, much less the way we're telling everyone right now. It's very stigmatized. It's very looked down upon. When I started dancing, dancers would be like, oh, well, I don't do extras in the back room, or, well, I only go to hotels to do that. There's very much a pecking order.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is a moment I would suggest, right, where we have an extraordinarily patriarchal, sexist president, and that those values, racism, those values of sexism, those values of violent aggression are so prevalent in our society right now. And at the same time, pornography makes more money than Hollywood by a mile. By 25,000 miles. It makes more money than the NFL, the Major League Baseball, and the NBA combined. So clearly there's an enormous level of hypocrisy happening right now. Can you talk a bit about how it is you have a completely different window onto the world, and how does that affect your understanding of politics and hypocrisy and what you're seeing in front of you all the time? An answer to that question right after the break. You're watching and listening to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. You're watching and listening to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. Okay, my guests are Merrick DeVille and Elle Stanger. We're talking about hypocrisy related to sex work right now, and in this current moment of Trump-inspired flagrant sexism and aggressive violence in our national ethos. So talk about this from your standpoint, the hypocrisy that you're seeing with respect to the work that you do.
So it's always been about control for the United States government in regards to other people's bodies. And we're talking about from the very beginning. Let's look at the last century of the United States government regulating how and when consenting adults can have sex. I love pointing out that sodomy was still federally illegal until 2009. So I think it was Lawrence v. Texas. And that's really a byproduct of homophobia. Anti-miscegenation laws, Black and white people intermarrying and having sex and breeding was illegal until Loving v. Virginia, I believe in 1967. There's still plenty of argument over whether or not gay people can get married or raise children. And this all comes down to consenting adults, and the activities and the preferences that they have, and the government regulates that. So of course, it also wants to regulate people who have sex outside of marriage or for money without the purpose of having children. And sex workers fall under those categories. So if you ever read The Handmaid's Tale, and I don't mean watch the show, because I don't know what's in the show. I didn't watch the show. I read the book when I was 13 and it scared the heck out of me. But there's a part where her lesbian best friend, she finds out, is engaging in sex work for wealthy men in power. And that's when she realizes that it doesn't matter what is illegal and how stringent the codes are for all of the working class. Rich people can always access whatever they want. And, Jeffrey Epstein is a great example of that. He had plenty of books of underage women he was trafficking all over, and he was very protected because of his class and his status. So the government does not give a heck about sex worker safety or rights because it's always been about controlling the workforce. And that's by removing access to contraception, shuttling poor people to live in the most rundown areas that aren't maintained and that are dumped and polluted more heavily. They don't care about people. That's my take.
Right. Merrick, what about you?
So I think that those are great points. I think what she didn't touch on was that there's a religious aspect as well. Yes, our government has a lot to do with trying to control bodily autonomy, but it's definitely coming from a very religious place. This is supposed to be a secular nation. I don't know that that's always the case when it comes to certain laws. Abortion is another great example of the way that we legislate women's bodies and try to control women's bodies. And I do believe that at the end of the day, this is less about sex work, and I think it's more about women. If you go onto Twitter right now and you look up OnlyFans, you'll see that OnlyFans is the newest point of contention in the culture war. It's not pro porn stars, it's not girls who do full service, it's not strippers, it's OnlyFans. You'll never, ever, ever see a post that goes, "Dear men, when you have kids in 10, 20 years, what are you going to tell them when they find your OnlyFans?" There's not even conversations about men that have OnlyFans. Men get really mad and they say that we women are being unfair in that we can succeed in sex work in as far as like online porn and they can't, which isn't true at all. So this hyper focus on what we do in sex work and not what men do. And I think it comes from a very religious place. As far as hypocrisy goes, there's a term in our industry, and I'm sure Elle will be very familiar. It's called pointing with one hand and jerking with the other. He's nodding. It's very, very, very common. I was reading something that was like 40% of internet searches are for porn. I mean, it's the reason, one of the reasons why we have the internet. There's so much demand, and yet the people who produce what everyone wants to see are punished for it. Well, some people, not male actors, female actors are punished for it. You can also see in the case of Robert Kraft, she brought up Epstein and sex trafficking. The women who ran the massage parlor, there was a sting where those women were filmed, they were photographed, they were watched for months and months and months, and then they were arrested, and they served more time than any of the men that they serviced at their clinic. This is down in Florida, I believe.
Florida. These women were immigrants too. Like that's the thing when people, thank you. When people talk about trafficking, it is the great fear that your daughter, your wife, your girlfriend will be snatched up on the street by a white van, which, by the way, that was a hoax. Those were work vans, Snopes it people. But no one's talking about immigrants. No one's talking about runaways. No one's talking about youth and trans kids who are usually, thank you for pointing out, Merrick, the ones who get kicked out on the street and become homeless when their conservative parents kick them out of the house for being gay or trans or whatever. And those are the kids that are most likely to meet a 25, or older, whatever, pimp at the mall that says, yeah, you can live with me. I'll even let you drink and do drugs and hang out with my older friends, but you just got to work and pay me rent. That is how pimp situations happen. Who cares about that? Because those.
Let's talk a little bit about violence, because I think that there is a national reaction right now to this incredible violence against people of color, against Black people, specifically against Black men. And I see a lot of these police officers, and this is just my outside observer opinion as a man, to be extraordinarily sexually repressed men or sexually infantile in terms of the way they express their opinions. Certainly Donald Trump is a sexually infantile type of person. And I find that there is a connection there between that kind of repression, that kind of attitude, lack of openness about sexuality with the violence that we're seeing, whether that's incels or police officers or people who are men who are pent up. Can you comment a little bit about that? Because we are seeing with COVID a rise in domestic violence, and we're having a national moment of reckoning about what it is to use force and how inappropriate that is in most situations, right? And how it's being misused, right? We're seeing a national conversation about violence, shouldn't we also be having a conversation about the sexual part of that, the libidinous part of that?
Yeah, no, I love that. When feminists like myself say that toxic masculinity is killing people and killing us, it's examples like they did a Penn State study where a lot of men don't recycle because they're afraid of being perceived as gay. So in the discussion about gender, it's not just women that are usually the class that is being punched down upon, it's anyone feminine. So this includes men that might be considered feminine for crying, liking pink, flowers, loving someone. So we have a really dominator-centric, aggressive centric culture that rewards short-sightedness, anger, show of force, control, refusal to negotiate. And so, is it any surprise we have men that are too ashamed and frustrated to ask for help and the support and services they need because they're already afraid of being perceived as weak, and they go out and do a mass shooting because if it's anything like the monogamy, ownership attitudes I see in sex with partners who don't want their partner to do sex work, they're like, this is my thing. If I can't have it, no one else can. If it can't be my way, no one else can. I will die for this thing because I'm attached to it and it's mine. There's a lot of unhealthy attachment that comes up with toxic masculinity, with unwillingness to negotiate or ask for help or, admit to not knowing something. So of course we have these leaders that can't talk to each other and won't ask for reasoning or feedback from the very people they're supposed to be guiding and serving. It's not a community-based leadership. It's a show of force. It's a dominator leadership.
Eric?
Yeah, I think she hits the nail on the head with that one. I genuinely believe that we are at a point in time where we have a generation of young men who are really disaffected. I think that there is, borderline a sickness that we're dealing with right now. My personal experience is constant harassment. I'm afraid I'm going to get doxxed. I'm afraid people are going to come to my house. I'm afraid that when I go to the club, people are going to take me, say, oh, I want an hour in VIP, and then they're going to try to strangle me in the back room. And I know that that's kind of dark, but this is very real. Our jobs are very dangerous, and people kind of like to punch down on OnlyFans and say, well, you're not really doing anything. But I am putting images out there that I think are harmless and that I think don't really matter. I make content with my husband. I don't see anything wrong with that. But there are people that want to murder me because of that. They want me dead. And that's just my reality every day. She's right. There is an absolute pervasive toxic attitude that we deal with. And I would also like to point out that I think that we can really start to change the tide of that if we start talking about it differently. I really like this whole toxic is a modifier, not an adjective, because I think when you bring up toxic masculinity, people shut down. Men especially shut down. They don't like being told that they're bad. They don't like being told that all men are bad. That's what they think is being said to them. It's not that. It's that we all suffer under patriarchy. And men do too. They don't get to talk about their feelings. They don't get to express their feelings. They don't get to be weak. It's like she said, anything that's feminine is bad. It's wrong. It's lesser. It's a huge problem. And it's a great threat to, I think, all of us, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that anyone can be killed in a mass shooting. Anyone can be killed, in these circumstances. But it is very clear that women are bearing the brunt of this type of activity, and that we're not talking about it. I don't understand. We've had so much talk of liberation of so many different kinds, but we don't talk about sexual liberation. Merrick, you and I were talking about this the other night in our pre-interview. You are saying that you believe that because we're changing attitudes about sex work and we're changing attitudes about sex in general, that we're going through a kind of a sexual revolution right now. I would love to have you talk a little bit more of that on that, and then have Elle weigh in after that. Is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
So I think OnlyFans, I keep bringing up OnlyFans, but I really think it's having a moment right now. In March, we had 3.5 million new signups. 60,000 of those were new creators. We are having conversations. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. That was March alone. I believe at this point now it's 150,000 new creator accounts.
Wow.
God knows how many just other accounts if 3.5 million consumers join. So I think it's having a moment, and because of that, we're talking about it a lot more.
You're tuned in to Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal. Why we're not going back. My guests are Merrick DeVille and Elle Stanger. We're talking about sex workers and sex workers' rights, and we're talking about the relationship to patriarchy and extractivism. So please continue.
So sex worker Twitter has really brought our voices forward. It's really brought conversations about sex work to the forefront of public discourse. That's really good in some ways. It's been really bad in other ways. I think it's been really bad in that it's given everybody the impetus and the opportunity to just attack us endlessly and to talk about it when they don't know anything about it and then convince other people that the things that they're saying are true. So that's been bad. But I think the more we talk about it in general and the more that we, Elle and I, people like Elle and I, get to talk about it, the more things are going to change. I genuinely believe that millennials and Gen Z have such a different attitude towards it than the generations before us. And I do genuinely believe that things are changing. And I think we have a moment right now where we can control and shape our narrative about our lives for us. I think that's so important.
Yeah, the proliferation of social media, like sex worker social media, has helped a lot, because how else do people hear from us? So acknowledging the types of people that are able to speak out, it's still more of us with privilege, people that can like afford to be on social media. And you said something earlier, Josh, it's not women, like just women, that are the most at risk for sex work-based violence. It's Black trans women or trans women of color. And again, those folks are the ones that often don't see enough media attention, because people in our culture might think they are throwaway people because they fit outside of a presentation binary. So in terms of revolutionary work that we can do, and we, I mean cis women, is stop doing transphobic stuff like making small penis jokes. Because what are we doing when we're still body shaming and saying that like you're a better man if you have a large phallus? Like that's absolutely not true. This is why I receive unsolicited penis photos, and you probably do too, because someone thinks you might actually want that. And that's like not a marker. That's not a characteristic I look for. Not everybody enjoys penis and vagina sex. A lot of people don't engage with phalluses. This is why they say that women who have sex with women tend to have higher rate of sexually satisfying events, because thrusting for a while is not how most female bodies go to orgasm very easily. And this might be a lot of information for people, but so we can consider that bodies exist on a spectrum. This is one of the problems with ecofeminism, because it started in the 1970s by white women, is it was very female body focused, with the idea that, oh, I menstruate, therefore I'm closer to nature. When we're all part of nature, a lot of female bodies don't menstruate. Men have breasts, plenty of them. You know, we all exist on a spectrum of facial hair and organs and testosterone and chromosomes. We're all a part of nature. Ecofeminism is not in women's hands alone, but we have to realize that like nature exists on a spectrum, sexuality exists on spectrums, people do, we're all connected. So
let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about the connections to nature, because Elle, you've talked about nurturing and how it's important to nurture in relationships. And that is the relationship that we should be having towards nature rather than exploitation. And anyone can join in on this, because we've had conversations about this, about extractivism, and how extractivism is the ownership of the earth, and that you cannot defend nature unless you own it. And how that's related to the ideas of possessiveness within relationships, right? That I own you, even, you know, and you talked a bit about how it's nearly impossible or difficult right now for people to understand relationships that are attached without them being possessive. Talk about that.
So consecutive monogamous relationships are usually the model we are provided in our culture. And that means I'm with one person. Maybe I love them intensely, spend all my time with them, build my world around them, refer to them as my better half. And then we break up. And then I hate that person. I never see them again. If we're friends, it's weird. Like I'm friends. I've been married twice. Okay. I'm friends with both of my ex-husbands and I co-parent with one. And that saying, it takes a village, that is a sustainable community-based attitude. Where again, like call out culture, if someone messes up, you don't ostracize and shun them from the community unless they're like a serial chronic offender. But when someone messes up, you support them and draw them in and ask how you can help work on their stuff. So with the earth in farming and growing, it doesn't always cooperate, but you can't just pound something into the soil and hope it grows. There has to be a compatibility, and that's with relationships, that's with growing things. We burn through these relationships. It's like slash and burn dating. Like, oh, this was fun, but now I wrecked it and I can't talk to this person. I know an entire handful of people that have had to move out of this town because they dated badly and now they lost all their friends, Like that is a toxic monogamy attitude to have.
Merrick, can we ask you about the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You're sort of talking about how polyamory is having a moment as well. This idea of ownership, I think, is falling out of favor. And we'll always have monogamy.
As we should. Some people, it's better suited for them. But
right. Definitely. You definitely shouldn't try to make a relationship style work for you if it's just not going to work for you. There's a little bit of that in the community where it's you probably shouldn't be polyamorous. You should probably be in therapy. There's definitely a little bit of that. It's something that you need to do responsibly. It's something that you need to do ethically. What was the other thing you said? It was something about extractivist attitudes. I did want to touch on.
Well, talking about the relationships between feminism and the values that you're portraying right now and promoting, that is more in line with the respect for the earth and respect for nature, in my view. And we were having that conversation, so I thought that would be an interesting thing to comment on.
Yeah, there's definitely parallels. I think you can see this sort of extractivist idea in sex work too, and in women's place. Like, I will take from you emotionally and you will just give me sex and you won't profit off of it. You'll just give to me. I think that's kind of why sex work is so inherently political, in that it bucks that. That's a part of patriarchy, and sex work says, no, I won't let you just take and take and take from me and I get nothing back from it. If I'm going to give something, I'm going to get something out of it too. There's definitely those parallels.
Let's just talk for a moment about the coronavirus. I, was a teenager during AIDS, and that was a very difficult thing to come of age sexually and be in a place where sex could kill you. But there was condoms. You could wear a condom, and you can't wear a condom and escape coronavirus. Talk about how that's affected both sexual attitudes and also your profession.
Well, you could wear a mask and then not do any rimming because the CDC said that it does pass through fecal matter. Or you could do rimming with a dental dam, but not a lot of people use those. Probably right now someone's like, what is a dental dam? Google it. They're really hard to find. It's very unfortunate.
See, when I went to college, there were instructions in your dorm for how to make them yourself. That's how.
Yeah. Well, you talk to elders who grew up before sex toys were manufactured regularly, or they lived in areas where you can't buy them, like the Deep South, where I think, is it Alabama or Louisiana? You needed to be, I think 19 and at least with a doctor's note to buy a sex toy. I don't know the case currently. So yeah, restrictiveness. Wow. So what about if people considered, okay, so here's an example of like toxic masculinity in relationships. The cycle that plays out that I see when I do consulting for people who need resources for talking about sex with their partners is, and I'm going to be really gendered here, but he is afraid to talk about it. She doesn't want to ask because it will upset him. So there's sexual incompatibilities, and that is his shame and fear, and also a lack of access and where to get information from, because sex ed isn't as widely available as it should be. I mean, like, people actively repress children and teens from knowing their own body parts in sex ed. So we need to encourage people to learn how to try to be brave enough to learn to ask for what they want from their partners, because something I see women do is like, oh, he can't make me come, or he didn't find my clit. And I say, well, did you suggest how? Did you tell him, suggest him? Like, no, he should just know how. That is a byproduct of toxic masculinity, believing that your partner should just read your mind. No, we all have to communicate. Again, we all have to be a little more humble, ask for what we need, work on the shame, and we need help to do that. So thank goodness that, sex educators and stuff exist, and sex workers, and podcast hosts.
You're watching Staying Home with Josh Fox, your revolutionary guide to the Green New Deal and why we're not going back. My guests are Merrick DeVille and Elle Stanger. We're talking about sex and sex work and sex workers' rights and feminism, and we're talking about a lot of things. And it's a wide-ranging and I think very important conversation. How about COVID for business? What did you see? That everybody is staying home, right? So
for me personally, it's been great. I've gone way up in my subs, which has been really nice. I think I'm very, very, very fortunate in that I have the ability to work online and to put out my content online. Other sex workers have not been it. I know a lot of people have really suffered because of this. My personal experience has been really good, and I'm hoping that it ends up being a net positive thing for our industry, because of the amount of people that are now turning to it to try to make ends meet during this. It was like I said earlier, there were 3.5 million new accounts that were created on OnlyFans alone. And OnlyFans isn't the only, hosting site. There's AVN Stars. There's, it's like My Crush. There's like a whole lot of them. So, My Girl. Okay, it's My Girl. Thank you. Yeah. So there's 3.5 million new signups in the month of March and 60,000 creators. I really hope that this is a turning point that sort of sways people's opinion, and they realize, oh, wow, this isn't something that comes from being morally corrupt. This is something that people do to get by. And not everyone does it to get by. I don't want to craft a victim narrative at all. That's definitely not the case. There are some people who are very fortunate who go, you know what? This works for me. I really like this. I don't see a problem with it. It's what I want to do. But that's not everybody. Not everyone is that fortunate. And I think this ties back to some of the things we've talked about earlier, where a lot of people who engage in sex work are runaways, trans people, people of color, people who are in the lower classes who don't really have a ton of options. So I'm hoping that now that a lot of people who before would have turned their nose up go, oh, wow, I can empathize because I was in a bad situation too. And it's what seemed like it would work and it would make money for me. And they can go, wow, it's not this evil, dirty thing.
Elle, go ahead, yes.
I have two thoughts that I don't want to lose. Yes, it's definitely, and I wrote this in a Huffington Post piece a few months ago, and I said with so many more people doing sex work for the first time, they're going to experience the pitfalls such as being outed, having their content stolen, not getting hired for that next job in 5 or 10 or 15 years, Wow. So there's going to be a lot more people who are understanding how hard it is to navigate the stigma, because the work itself might not be difficult at all. I have no problem shooting a scene or playing with myself or talking to people about sex or whatever. But if they want to rip me off or hurt me about it, that's how it's damaging. So when we change our attitudes to be grateful to the provider and the services and the energy they render, we change our whole attitude. And the second thought that I'm going into with that is the byproduct of a patriarchal culture where we have built the idea around a Virgin Mary okay, what about the cultures like the Minoans in Crete? They were a women-focused society, and there was very low violence. They did not have a bunch of statues of wartime. They had a statue of a goddess. Archaeologists found their only statue was a goddess with like a bunch of grains and fruits. So worshiping food, nature, sex, women, birth, fertility. Like, this is the good life. Like, why don't we focus to these things instead of look at my big guns and my big truck? Because that culture really freaks me out.
Yeah, you're not kidding. That culture freaks me out too. Can we? Let me just talk about the narrative. So we talked about rights, not rescue. Rights for sex workers, not rescue of sex workers. Talk about what does that mean? Because I think that is a very important slogan and also notion.
I'll go quick first, and Merrick, you want to finish. We need to decriminalize prostitution. Prostitution is the legal term for adults consensually engaging in sexual activity for money. Prostitute is often used as a slur, but we need to decriminalize prostitution, and here's why. As somebody who not only went to school for criminology and got my bachelor's in it, and then sits in community meetings with state and local law enforcement to talk about how their policies are negatively impacting my peers and the people with less privilege than I, these laws do not help people. I do not report a robbery or an assault if my job is illegal, and nobody will. So when you decriminalize the action of selling sex, this means the resources, law enforcement, social services, domestic violence, can focus on people who need rescue, are asking for it, or can't advocate for themselves, like runaways and teens. So when you get these hard conservative people who say, I just don't believe that it should be okay, that's too bad. Their beliefs don't really line up with harm reduction, because if you want the least amount of people getting hurt, all of God's children, including the whores, decriminalize the sale of sex. Jesus hung out with prostitutes, right?
Merrick, did you want to comment?
Yeah. I really thank you for bringing that up. We talk about stopping sex trafficking and helping victims with things like FOSTA SESTA. But if we really wanted to help victims of human trafficking and of sex trafficking, we would decriminalize sex work. If you say someone has smuggled you from El Salvador and you get here into the United States, and that person goes, well, now you're chained to a bed until enough gentlemen have come through here and worked you enough until you can pay me back what you owe me, and you somehow break free. Are you going to the cops? No, absolutely not, because they're going to arrest you and they're going to deport you. Say that you are working a track, say that a pimp has got you. And I did want to point out something that, she was talking about pimps earlier. They've moved into the digital sphere. Pimps are living in the 21st century. Our politicians may not be, but pimps are. They're outsmarting our politicians. They're getting on Tinder. I had a pimp solicit me on Tinder. He talked about how we would be kings and queens and we would build an empire together, and he would get me in these clubs, and he lives in Atlanta, and he would get me in this club and he would get me in that club. He just needed to make sure that he controls the money, because at the end of the month, if I go spend it on my hair and my nails, well, come the end of the month, we're not going to have our bill money. And he was so nice to me, and he made it seem like we would be in a relationship and we would date and I would be his queen. No, that's how they talk to people. And they get these young girls, they get impressionable girls. And if you've been turned out and someone is convinced you they love you and now abuses you and makes you do sex work for them to line their pocket, if you're 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever, you're not going to go to the police. You're not going to talk about what that person has been doing to you, because you're going to jail too. If we really wanted to help victims, we would stop punishing them and we would decriminalize consenting acts between adults.
Here.
And not legalized either, because that's just going to put controls as to who can do it, like needing permits or regular medical inspection, which I don't want the government to tell me when a sex worker has to open their legs and get a swab, or like get taxed heavily or regulated. I don't want to be on a registry. Just decriminalize it.
Let's end on a positive note. My last question, talking about healing. This is a time of disease. Merrick, you were talking about how men you're feeling like there's a sickness afoot. And Elle, you've talked to me about sex workers being considered shamans or healers. Talk about this moment of healing and how this can be healing work and how important that is right now, both psychologically and physically for people.
I'll go first. Under capitalism, there is very limited choice. Merrick said it earlier. There's people who love this work. There's people who really, really don't and are afraid of maybe being outed or punished at any point. I get messages from people who say, I really want to do webcam or dance or sell underwear, whatever, but my boyfriend won't let me. And I'm like, damn, you need to break up with your boyfriend. But the fact is, a lot of people can't because, a lot of us live in cycles of poverty and living wages aren't good. So how do you get out of these unsafe situations in the first place? But how we can heal is we need to stop shaming sexuality. We need to reinforce the idea that people can pay for content and it's a good thing. We need to always include in the conversation disability in sex and how having happy consensual providers who will see someone who, like I had a guy tell me, he says, my MS, my multiple sclerosis is not a problem for anyone except for my dating, but can we do a webcam? So dating is hard for him to navigate, but it's very cut and dry to book a session with me and we can have sexy time and I get paid. I'm happy. He's happy. Some countries I think it's the Netherlands, New Zealand, I believe, but they'll allow, I think Japan does this too. They'll allow a certain amount of money for their citizens to spend on touch services, including erotic ones, because it is healing. Ejaculations are healthy. If you want to avoid prostate cancer, you should ejaculate at least once a week, and that's true for people with female anatomy or intersex anatomy. Blood flow is good for you. The happy hormones are good for you. Sex is good for us when it's done safely and consensually. So let's focus on that, let's get holistic.
Merrick, thank you so much for that. Merrick, you get the last word, I believe.
I couldn't agree more. What we do is essential. I don't want to live in a society where there's more sexually frustrated people. I don't want to see it. I don't want to be a part of it. Human touch, human contact, intimacy, we need it. We need a lot more of it in other forms, but we definitely need sexual and emotional intimacy. And what we do is a very necessary service.
All right, well.
Last thing, please. I don't have sex with people who litter. So, protect nature, protect us all.
Well, I think this is the start of a number of very important conversations on this topic. I think that we don't talk about this enough. I want to thank you both for being on the program. If you have suggested other folks who want to come on, you can certainly refer them and we'll continue this because I really believe that unless we talk about our sexually repressive attitudes and patriarchy and all the violence that's related to that, we are not going to be in a position to implement a Green New Deal with any sense of justice. So I want to thank you both for being on today and we'll talk again.
Viva la revolución. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Until we see you next time, stay healthy, stay revolutionary, stay sexy. Thanks.
I'll predict right here for you, Chris. I think Donald Trump will leave office before his term is up. He'll be humiliated, embarrassed, and I know him. He's not going to want to lose, and he's going to run for the hills.
You got that bet all day long.
Okay, let's get after it. Now, so look, Jake has made some good predictions, and this is in good fun. I could not disagree more.
There's a little bromance between the two of them. You got that bet all day long, Janky, you. Oh, you stop. In the meantime, let's call him out on the damage.
No, but
I just got a Roku set. Did basically a little bit of channel surfing, and I was like, there we are.
Yeah.
There we are. And then I turned it on, and it was John and Brett on Damage Report making fun of me.
Oh, no.
So you are so busted. I even took a picture of it, okay? And they're talking about my predictions. I got a new prediction for you, John Idarola.
You're doing a show that's blowing the doors off everybody.
Young Turks is the largest online news network, not a big deal. We're gonna rock the boat. We're gonna be counter-establishment. We're gonna tell people the truth to the best of our abilities. We're so sick of this corruption. We're not the robots on TV. I actually care about the news. Guilty, I care. Fourth day on Occupy Wall Street. Last night we launched Wolfpack. It's us pushing our ideas out there, trying to help the country in every way that we can, trying to make this place just a little bit better.
Reporting from the Hillary-Bernie debate. I gotta be honest, you know what we do? We cover it for real.
For us, this system isn't working.
Free and fair elections.
And when he told the cops that day, when they came to drag her away, and he said, if you're gonna chain her, you're gonna chain me. If you're gonna arrest her, you're gonna arrest me.
Doe will pay for your first share of stock. Doe is unlimited commission-free stock trades and great ideas from real traders. When you head to doe.com/TYT, your first share of stock is on them. Learn how you can become an owner, not just a consumer, at doe.com/TYT.
Hi, I'm Bartholomew Joseph Kyle. I do audio for the main show, The Young Turks. I also do audio for Post Game. I started in 2006. I met Cenk Uygur at the Iraq for Sale screening that was directed by Robert Greenwald. And watching that, I want to figure out a way to be part of something that's genuine and authentic.
conversation on the TYT network. I am so excited to have our next guest on. It's not an exaggeration when I tell you he's one of the living legends in this country. It's Reverend William Barber. He is the president and senior lecturer of the Repairers of the Breach, co-chair of the People's Campaign, and has a new book called We Are Called to Be a Movement. Reverend Barber, great to have you on TYT.
Thank you so much. I'm always honored to be with you.
First off, for the uninitiated, what is the Poor People's Campaign?
Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is a massive intersectional, multi-generational, multiracial movement that focuses on 5 areas: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative, religious nationalism. We began in 2018. We moved through with a series, 2017, excuse me. We moved through with a series of grassroots efforts and organizing, permanently organized communities. We have over 45 state coordinating committees now. We are committed to all forms of challenge, even nonviolent civil disobedience. We believe that the deep problem in America is the fact that we have 140 million poor and low-wealth people, 43% of this nation, and we've not addressed it. We've not heard our politics address it. Too often the politics of poverty is either racialized by Republicans or run from by Democrats, and we need to deal with the reality of poverty. But you can't deal with the reality of poverty without dealing with the interlocking injustices. And just this past week, 2 weeks ago, June 20th, we had the largest gathering of poor, low-wealth people and their allies ever in the history of the nation. The Mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington Digital Affair. Over 2.7 million people joined just on Facebook alone. We had over 400,000 people to take action to send what we call our Moral Justice Jubilee budget and platform to every member of the United States Congress, as well as to every governor, demanding fundamental shift and a third reconstruction, not from left and right and Democrat and Republican, but from a moral perspective. What is our deepest moral values and our deepest constitutional values about justice and caring for the least of these and providing for the common defense and the general welfare.
So I know you believe in civil disobedience because you got your MacArthur Genius Award while you were getting arrested a couple of years ago doing civil disobedience. And obviously Reverend Martin Luther King wanted to do the Poor People's March and probably would have been amazed at modern technology that wound up bringing those 2.7 million people together. But Reverend Barber, we do have a fundamental problem in this country. It's not just income inequality, it's the politics that led to that income inequality. Because as you gather up millions of people and you preach the gospel, and a gospel that liberals and conservatives agreed to, it's inarguable, it's in the books, and the number one thing that Jesus says, and by the way, the Quran says, and almost all other religious books say, is feed the poor, help the needy. Yet, we do not do that. None of our politicians agree to do that. So what is fundamentally broken in this system and how can we fix it?
Yeah, and Dr. King, you're right, was beginning, but people also need to remember that it was the National Welfare Workers, women, who pushed him to do it. It was the Jewish Federation, it was Cesar Chavez, it was indigenous people. They were all coming together, which is part of what we say in the Poor People's Campaign. We first have to change the narrative. Too often poverty is seen as those people over there. So one thing in the Poor People's Campaign we do is we put people's faces and voices in front of America. We're making America see herself. Sometimes we've had people pontificate on behalf of the poor, but they don't really believe in the agency of poor people. And they don't believe in counterintuitive narrators. So we put together the farmer from Kansas who may be white, the coal miner from Kentucky who may be white, with the black fast food worker from the Carolinas, with the Latino from California, with the Apache Indian from Arizona, and they're all coming together in this mighty coalition. We have to change the narrative. Second thing, the reason we have not seen politicians do it is because our politics have so devolved since the war on poverty, we don't even talk about poverty. You think about it. We've had nearly 40-some debates since 2016 at the presidential level. And all you've heard is about the middle class, the wealthy, and then innuendos about what this person is doing, that person is doing in their personal life. But we've not addressed poverty. And when it is addressed, we use the wrong number. We talk about 39 million poor people rather than the 140 million poor and low wealth people, which is 43% of this nation. And then thirdly, we tend to, sometimes it's racialized, and we don't deal with the fact that 66 million of the 140 million poor and low wealth people are white. Now, 61% of all black people are poor and low wealth. So it disproportionately affects black people, but in raw numbers, it's more white people. And then we don't connect the dots sometimes. And what I mean by that, that racialized voter suppression is targeted at blacks. But the people who engage in racialized voter suppression, once they get elected, they pass bills against living wages and against health care. So they actually end up hurting more white people in raw numbers than black people. But the target is African Americans. And then the final thing is we have often not, the political systems have not felt the political power of poor and low wealth people. You know, Trump won in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin by 102,000 votes. There are 2.1 million poor and low wealth people that didn't even vote. Many of the 100 million people that didn't vote in the last election are poor and low wealth people who don't vote either way because they never hear the politicians coming to them or talking to them or lifting up the issues. And so that has to change, which is why we are trying to force a change in the debate, changing the narrative, and changing the power base. And then I think I would say, lastly, it is a shame that we're not dealing with these issues. I mean, one of the things, there's a economist at MIT, Otto Schwammer, and he says one of the greatest faults in our economic system today is conscience. We have the resources. The lie of scarcity is a lie. But what we've not had is the conscience. We've engaged in too much attention violence against the poor. And it is literally shameful that we would allow 43% of our people in this country to go to live in poverty. 700 people dying a day from poverty, according to a study from Columbia University. And the attention violence is atrocious. And one of the reasons we have the attention violence is because both parties tend to be locked into this neoliberalism. And it's either social Darwinism of Republicans. In other words, you give everything to the top and the trickle down, which is trickle down. Or Democrats tend to think if you just take care of the middle class, somehow it'll fix things at the bottom. Well, that's not true. The reality is we need to loose ourselves from this neoliberalism and recognize that you can't just say rising tides lift all boats if the boats got holes in them. and a lot of boats, people's lives got holes in them because of disinvestment in community, because of racism in community, because of the lack of basic living wages. So you have to make sure the boats are right in order for the tides to lift. And that's why we believe in moral fusion and a moral understanding of economics that says what, you know, one of the things the scripture said, you mentioned Jesus, but there's another scripture that says, woe unto those who legislate evil, Isaiah 10, and rob the poor. Right. In other words, poverty is a choice. 43% of this country is a choice, and living in poverty is a choice. People not having living wages is choices, not personal choices and personal morality. It's public immorality and political immorality.
Can you emphasize two things for us? When you say 43% of Americans, what is your cutoff for that? What is your threshold? What are you basing the 43% on? And what do you mean by attention violence?
Mm-hmm. There are several studies that have said if you just take the baseline, the government baseline, what constitutes a person being in poverty, it says something like if you make a little bit over $12,000 as a single person, you're not in poverty. Well, we know that's not true, because there's not a county in this country where working full time at a minimum wage job, you can afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. So what we look at is another measure where it looks at level of poverty. Then we look at the number of people who are getting subsistence in various ways from the government. And we look at the living wage measurement. And the living wage is around $15 an hour now that we would look at. It should be higher, because the minimum wage should be much higher than that if it kept pace with inflation. And when you look at that model, then you come up with 140 million poor and low wealth people or low income people, not just poor. Because see, a person they can be making it from paycheck to paycheck, but they're basically low wealth because they're only $400 away from major catastrophe. So you have to look at it that way. Attention violence is when you don't pay attention, as my grandmama said. So when we have all of these political debates, if anybody, I dare anybody to go back through all of the debates that have been held at the presidential level for the last election cycle, and even this one, look at the primaries, look at the general, find one debate where we spent an hour on poverty, or we spent 20 minutes on poverty and low income, or we spent a half an hour on racist voter suppression that allows people to get elected, who once they get elected, they prove that they not only believe in racist voter suppression, they also don't believe in living wages and they don't believe in healthcare. We've not had that kind of discussion. So that's a form of attention violence. It's almost a looking the other way or acting like we don't have to pay attention to it. That's why when we had the Mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington a few weeks ago, people were just calling and going in the chat saying, I've never seen this. That we put people in front of people. They said, that looks like my uncle. That looks like my grandmother. You mean to tell me a Kansas farmer is struggling the same way a fast food worker is struggling? Both of them were on the throne together. We had coal miners sitting right beside a black woman who named Pamela Rush, who sadly just died the other day from COVID. But they were together in a hearing. This black woman from Alabama, these white coal miners saying, look, but we are facing all the same thing. These 5 interlocking injustices are hurting all of our lives. We have to change this picture. We have to change the narrative, and you can't change the narrative without changing the narrators.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
We don't run our own country. We've lost our democracy, and all we have left is rage.
Where are the Democrats? I would be on every cable news channel screaming and yelling and talking about what the Republicans are doing right now.
How do you expect us to get excited to show up to the polls for these loser Democrats? How come we have nothing but cowards who'll never fight? Primaries are everything.
Building a great wall on the southern border.
You have politicians who fearmonger about disenfranchised groups.
The first attacker came through the visa lottery.
Now they are against legal immigrants.
Ending chain migration.
They don't want people from those countries coming here because they're racist. This guy's an absolute monumental disgrace to all of us as Americans.
Stop treating us like animals and bugs and start treating us with some respect.
That is what I was warning about for literally years on this program. This is what they promised they would do if they got into power, and what do you know? They did it.
I've now shown dozens of videos on the Young Turks of cops handcuffing people who are bleeding to death. His life means nothing. We have been trained to be cowards, so we're gonna handcuff that guy bleeding to death.
When it comes to these protesters who are justifiably enraged at members of their community getting gunned down and murdered by police force.
We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd.
They said that this was impossible, but now we're beginning to move that boulder. And at the end, we'll get our democracy back. Primary the living hell out of these Democrats, and let's take over the party. That's a ghost ship. Let's board it, and let's take it.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I had How to Miss a Live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning. Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Federal minimum wage is $7.25, which equals about $15,000 a year if you work full time, 40 hours a week.
Full time, that's right.
And so even if you brought it up to $15, it equals about $31,000 a year. And I've talked to teachers, I've talked to serious professionals who cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment, just like William Barber said. And so
it really should be $20 an hour. If you really look at over the years, some economists have said that it should be $20 an hour. That's why Joseph Stiglitz said it's the cost of inequality. Not, for instance, if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour right now, you could bring over 40 million people up out of a low wage worker. 40 million with just going up to 15. You go up to a housing wage where they could actually afford a house, not rent somewhere, afford a house. Is 73 million people, 70-some million people. And when we say living wage, we're talking about a used car and renting. We're not talking about, superfluous things. We're not talking about extravagancy. We're talking about fundamental fairness.
How much responsibility does the national media bear in this attention violence and not paying attention to the 140 million Americans suffering?
The media oftentimes, just like right now, we're chasing around Trump as he's talking against monuments and talking against flag and not paying attention to his economic policies that are hurting people, to all of the things that are being done underneath. We got to stop this chasing the firefly. The media has a responsibility to report on the reality of America, and how in the world do you ignore 140 million people, over 50% of our children? 62 million people are making less than living wage. If that's not a story. And then when 2.7 million people come to hear and join with the Mass Poor People's Campaign, how do you not talk about that in the midst of what's going on? But the political systems are wrong because they don't deal with it in their platforms. They run from it as well. There's a lot of blame to go around. And even poor people are starting to say, you know what? It's time for us to say we won't be silent anymore. It's time for us to say we're not going to wait on them anymore. That's why we're going to have our own mass assemblies. And if we hadn't been for Corona, we would have been on Pennsylvania Avenue. But the media, I think, has a lot to do with this, and the politicians and the political systems have a lot to do with it, and because they lie. Then what I mean by the political system, when you start talking about dealing with power, they said, first thing, well, we're going to have to raise taxes. That's a lie. The money is in our bloated defense budget. We spend $800 billion a year in defense. If we cut our defense budget in half, we still have more money in defense than Iran, Iraq, China, and North Korea combined. And we would have the money to do the things we need to do to ensure that we address the issues of poverty, even in the midst of coronavirus. This is the story. We passed three bills. McConnell and Trump wouldn't let them go through until 84% of all the money went to banks and to corporations. But I also challenged Democrats in the House. They should have put together a bill that was stronger, that made sure essential workers had the essential things they needed, like sick leave and unemployment and living wages and health care and guarantee on rent forgiveness and moratoriums on their utilities being cut off. And then make McConnell have to cut it, but don't cut it for him. So we've got to have a different kind of boldness, because we're leaving 143 million people without the things they need in this democracy.
Let's talk about Democrats. So if folks in that party wanted to actually fight for these, you would be the greatest ally they could have.
Poor people would be the greatest ally. Yeah, low wage
Well,
folks. I've talked to all over the country.
Yeah, 140 million people would be a good ally in a if we were really living in a democracy, and certainly you would be. So, do Democrats ever reach out to you and say, "Look, we want to help on these issues that you care about, and so help us get to these results"? Or do you never hear from Democratic leadership?
No, we actually are starting to hear from them now because the poor people have said we are organized. In fact, after we did 6 weeks of civil disobedience in 2018, we started hearing from them. Now that we've done this mass poor people's assembly, we're getting called. In fact, next week, we're doing a briefing with congresspersons who want to take our agenda and turn it into legislative, to actually put bills to it. Now, we're not going to be fooled. We don't want just window dressing, right? Because we're serious. But they're also starting to hear, that we got a study coming out that's going to show how just 15% of poor and low wealth people were organized to vote. They fundamentally shifted politics all over the country. We're able to talk now about a third of all poor people live in the South, a third of all white poor people live in the South, and the number of poor and low wealth people that did not vote, they outnumber the margin of victory by any candidate in the presidential race, the Senate race, or the gubernatorial race. And because we're organizing permanently organized communities, the politicians are knowing this poor people's campaign is not just national. We have, coordinating committees in every state, and they're having to see their constituencies. And so it's beginning to happen. It's not an easy thing for some of them, but it should be easy because this is about doing what's right. And we're going to keep pushing until, so I'm cautiously hopeful, but we got a long ways to go, but we're going to keep pushing and we're going to have a major impact. We're going to show the power of poor and low wealth people in this election season to let people know we're not going anywhere. Trump won by 101,000 votes, as I said, in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. 2.1 million poor and low wealth people didn't vote. And many of them, as we talked to them, didn't vote because they never hear their name or their situations discussed. In the backwoods of Kentucky, I asked people in Harlan County, why did you all vote for Trump? Many of them said, we didn't vote. We just didn't vote. I said, why? They said the last Democrat that came back here in earnest was Lyndon Baines Johnson at the beginning of the war on poverty. If Democrats will stop talking this language, just middle class, and start talking about poor and low wealth people, say the word, and then put policies in place that deal with that and lift from the bottom, they will see a fundamental shift. But their consultants tell them don't say the word poor. We talked to the presidential candidate that he said it publicly. That the consultants tell them don't use the word poor, and poor people don't want to be called poor. Well, poor people tell us all the time we are not offended by being called poor. We're offended in a nation that won't address poverty. That's what offends us.
So look, I think that the Republican voters have a lot of issues, and I think that there is significant racism and bigotry built into that pie. And they will not break with Trump. Over 80% of them still support him. But on economic issues, they agree with you, Reverend Barber, and you see it in the ballot measures. So when they went to increase minimum wages, they were even voting out Democrats in Arkansas and Missouri. Minimum wage passed easily, 62% in Missouri, 68% in Arkansas. In just a couple of days ago in Oklahoma, they passed a ballot measure to increase Medicaid, increase Obamacare. And so even the most Republican voters on economic issues are with you, Reverend Barber.
Yeah,
but politicians are not. And so what is going wrong that they are getting deluded into thinking that Republican politicians serve them when they do the exact opposite?
Well, Dr. King talked about this unholy alliance between the aristocracy and Southern politicians, where they use race to get elected, but what they use, their power once they get elected, is to their corporate friends and to tax cuts for the wealthy. And what has to happen is we have to show people the intersection between racism and economic pain. We know that in this country, though, every time there's the possibility of black and white and brown people forming a coalition, particularly poor people, to change the political landscape, the aristocracy, the wealthy, sow division. And that's a lot of what we see focusing with Trump now and the Republican Party. Now, I would tend to say this one thing. I don't normally call people conservative and liberal. I know that term is used, but because To be a true conservative means you would want to conserve the establishment of justice and conserve the providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare, which is the essence of our Constitution, equal protection under the law. What I say is let's change the language from liberal and conservative to talk about right and wrong, to talk about moral issues. And when we do that, I have found, we went to Kentucky and we organized in 5 counties that were Trump counties. We never endorsed the new governor. We endorsed issues. And the governor picked the governor that's just been elected, picked them up. 3 of those 5 counties flipped. Now, we haven't had a lot of stories about that, but 3 of those 5 counties flipped. When the governor started talking about wages, felony disenfranchisement, and restoring health care. And these were the so-called red counties. I believe people can flip and change if politicians have the courage to talk about these issues and then put together a plan. And we believe we have the plan. We believe it's the time. And we believe the people are recognizing that we are the movement. We are called to be a movement, not somebody else. We're called to be a movement and are starting to come together in powerful ways.
All right. And in fact, the book is called We Are Called to Be a Movement. Thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Really deeply appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. And I'd love to come back and go detail by detail through our platform with you and your listeners.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2,
Welcome to this special meeting of Orange County Board of Supervisors.
Hi, my name's Jim. I'm getting tired of a type of draconian harassment when I want to go about my daily life.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
All of you are ignoring the science and you're ignoring the law. I want to see every one of you charged, and I want to see you in jail. We have more people dying from the flu, from suicide, and from wearing the mask now, and you all sit there like you don't care about human life in Orange County. You work for us. Capiche?
You see that white dog crap? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Not too fun down there, is it?
No.
You see your actions have consequences. When you oppress people, they rise up in fiery anger.
What's up, everyone? Happy Wednesday. Anna Kasparian and John Idorola with you. We're going to have an awesome show. Lots of news to update you on. Lots of hypocrisy to reveal, to uncover. You know, doing the hard work here at TYT. John, how are you?
I'm good. And, because I wasn't on the show yesterday, I would like to take this opportunity to say happy birthday.
Thank you. I mean, I feel so lucky for the audience that we have, for the people I get to work with. Lots of really sweet messages, and I'm genuinely grateful. Thank you so much, everyone. Also, all of those donations that were made yesterday as part of our fundraising effort to celebrate my birthday, you guys didn't have to do that, and it's definitely appreciated. That's awesome. I don't know the exact amount, but I saw, in our doc, our sheet that shares all your comments and your donations, that some people did it in honor of my birthday. So thank you. Awesome. Just a few notes before we move on to our stories. We are, of course, partnered up with Aspiration, a wonderful financial institution that keeps the environment in mind. They will not invest your money in the fossil fuel companies, and they plant trees every time you use their checkings account. You can sign up for a free account by going to aspiration.com/TYT. They plant a tree with every purchase, and you can also save money by getting rewarded every time you shop at environmentally conscious places. Also, programming note that's super exciting. So if you have Samsung TV Plus, okay, we're on it. Not a big deal.
What?
We're everywhere. Mr. Worldwide. So if you have Samsung TV, you can find TYT on Samsung TV Plus, channel 1032. Channel 1032. The Young Turks is on there. So is the Damage Report and all your other, many of your other favorite TYT shows. So definitely check that out. Again, that's channel 1032 on Samsung TV Plus.
It's awesome. We almost cracked the top 1,000. That's awesome. Kidding.
Don't be a downer.
It has nothing to do with that. I know.
Anyway, all right. Well, let's get to the news because, as always, we have multiple examples of Republicans showing us how little they value our lives. So, Donald Trump is urging states to reopen their schools in the fall, even though we're still dealing with a rapid surge in new coronavirus cases. So he tweeted, "All schools must reopen" on Twitter in all caps. And following that, it turned out that the state of Florida decided that they will, in fact, start opening schools back up for the fall. That story is actually a little more complicated, and there are caveats that I'll share with you in just a minute. But before I do, let's hear from Donald Trump. Let's see if he makes a persuasive case to send our children to schools while the numbers of new coronavirus cases continue to increase.
And we hope that most schools are going to be open. We don't want people to make political statements or do it for political reasons. They think it's going to be good for them politically, so they keep the schools closed. No way. So we're very much going to put pressure on governors and everybody else to open the schools, to get them open. And it's very important. It's very important for our country. It's very important for the well-being of the student and the parents. So we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on open your schools in the fall.
Well, Trump made his remarks hours after Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who hates public schools and wants to defund them, assailed plans by some local districts to offer in-person instruction only a few days a week, and said schools must be, quote, fully operational, end quote. Anything less, she said, would fail students and, here's the magic word, everyone, taxpayers. Betsy DeVos and people like Betsy DeVos despise public schools because they hate that some of their tax money, a relatively small portion of their tax money, local taxes, property taxes, go toward these public schools, which is why she's fought so aggressively to privatize them. So for her and for the Trump administration overall, this isn't about ensuring that students get the education they deserve, the education they need. This isn't about protecting their lives or protecting the lives of their family members. This is political. There's no question about it. And this also has to do with their disdain for public schools.
Yeah, I took issue, obviously, with what Trump said. Rarely has projection been as projecty as what he said there. We're going to open the schools. We're not going to let them not open the schools for political reasons. They just want to do it for political reasons to not open it. No politics, but we're going to put big pressure on open the schools. Politics isn't on my mind. I mean, come on. It's the most obvious thing in the world that he doesn't care, that he thinks it's an important part of making it look like the country has recovered from the pandemic. It's these big symbolic things. I mean, it's that. I mean, worst case, an even worse example of that, I think, would be sporting events. They want to have these big gatherings so that people get the false impression that we're back to normal, and that's the most important thing to them. Actually, getting kids back to school is very important, but it has to be done under the right circumstances. And both in terms of the politicians in his administration and the right-wing media are showing that they don't give a damn about that part of it. They just want it to happen. They don't care if it happens safely.
Exactly. Look, for Trump, this is all about appearances. And in his mind, like, he has this crazy paranoid mind. He thinks that everyone is conspiring against him. And the decision to keep these schools closed isn't about keeping people healthy and safe. It's about making him look bad. It's the same line of thinking he has when it comes to masks. He told the Wall Street Journal, he was very transparent, that he believes that some people are wearing masks simply to make him look bad, when in reality, it's about slowing the spread of this virus. And so, and I get it. For anyone who's frustrated at the situation, you might have kids and you're hoping your kids could go back to school soon because you're worried about them not getting the education they need and deserve. I definitely hear that. And it goes beyond curriculum. It's also about socializing. It's about being with your friends. It's about, these important life experiences that kids need in the years where they're rapidly developing. But at the same time, you're right, John. As much as I want kids to go back to school and have these experiences, we need to do it in a smart way. We need to make sure it's staggered so we minimize the danger. But more importantly, we need to consider that it's not just about kids, because the overwhelming argument is, well, these kids are young, they're healthy, and they're less likely to be symptomatic if they get COVID. But keep in mind that 1 in 5 Americans right now lives in a multi-generational home because of the economic inequality in this country. And so these kids don't live in a vacuum. So they could get elderly people in their household sick. They could get their own parents sick, right? If they have some sort of health vulnerability that makes COVID much more disastrous for them than for young people, for instance. And so these are questions that I haven't really seen been answered by the Trump administration. And Trump has also distanced himself from the coronavirus task team. He hasn't worked with them or attended a single meeting since April. And now the wedge between Trump and Fauci seems to be increasing. And I'm worried about that as well, because Anthony Fauci is really the only person I trust in the federal government at this point to do the right thing and give us the right advice.
100%. He hasn't had a meeting with them for some time. He's pulling us out of the WHO. He spent the morning criticizing the CDC. All of the people who actually know what they're talking about are his worst enemies at this point. And I want to double down on what I was saying before, because I don't think I made my point very clearly about what the objective is and how nakedly partisan it is. Getting kids back to school in a way that is safe is an objective good. The issue for the right is that they really are more concerned about pretending that everything is okay. And getting kids to school with social distancing and wearing masks accomplishes the substantive goal of letting kids learn, but it doesn't accomplish the goal of making it seem as if we're past the pandemic, which is why the right has been going to ridiculous lengths to attack that recently. I don't think we're using the Tucker Carlson video, so I'm okay to read this quote on this? I don't think we have it. So Tucker Carlson last night said many schools that do plan to reopen will do so under a series of restrictions that have no basis of any kind in science. It's kind of a bizarre health theater. Students will be kept 6 feet apart. Everyone will have to wear a mask. Class sizes will be limited. So he's acknowledging there that what he wants, which is schools reopening, is happening. But he doesn't want it to happen if, in happening, the kids have to acknowledge the pandemic. He'd previously said on March 30th, of course masks work, everyone knows that. Now they're unscientific because he and the right have trained people to think of masks as a Bill Gates 5G conspiracy. And so this is the lengths that they've gone to now, where it's not enough to get what they want, a reopened economy and schools reopened. It has to be that plus no acknowledgement whatsoever of the pandemic, no matter how many people it kills.
Yeah, because it's political. This is all political. What we're hearing from the Republicans, what we're hearing from people like Tucker Carlson, it's not about, oh, we value education. It's not about keeping anyone safe. It's all about giving you this like false sense of security, of safety. And they're messing with your lives. They're messing with your children's lives. And look, it's not, yes, it's rare for children to be symptomatic or to suffer grave consequences from this virus, but it's not unheard of. You know, what if there's a child with asthma? What if there's a child who has some sort of vulnerability that maybe even the parents don't know about yet? It's just not as safe as the right wing is making it out to be. And by the way, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention put out guidance for schools last month, guidance that Trump hates, including staggering schedules, spreading out desks for social distancing, having meals in classrooms instead of the cafeteria, adding physical barriers between bathroom sinks, and cleaning and disinfecting surfaces. By the way, I also want you to hear the callous argument coming from people like Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends when it comes to the issue of opening up schools. Take a look.
This is not Ebola. It's the coronavirus. Mostly the kids, 99.9% of kids will not be affected by it at all. We know about the transference. We also know about the rarity. This is a risk that has to be taken. And I think kids get used to not taking things for granted. They got the message. They're starting to play sports now in my town. The kids with special needs are beginning summer school. They're beginning to understand how to do it. For teachers, this is going to be a challenge. They're used to clearing challenges. They don't do it for the money. They are usually extraordinarily dedicated people who are used to finding a way to get things done. We got to adapt that military attitude. They don't complain. They find a way to do it.
That's madness.
That was such a disgusting, callous statement, especially in regard to teachers. They don't do it for the money. They'll find a way to get it done. They just don't care about these teachers at all, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's one other part of the conversation that's important. It's these kids don't live in a vacuum. They also don't learn in a vacuum, right? So teachers will be at risk, and they're already devastatingly underpaid. The way that our system is run is just abusive toward them, you know? And to hear that kind of statement from Brian Kilmeade was just infuriating. By the way, so even though there's overwhelming pressure for these, schools to open, keep in mind that 90% of the funding for public schools, and I'm talking about grade schools, come from the local government. Essentially, the local government gets to decide whether or not these schools open. They get to decide how these schools open. And so Texas basically said, no, we're not. And I give them credit for that. Florida, on the other hand, was like, yeah, we're going to totally open our schools. We're going to totally do it. In the fall, that's it. Brick and mortar schools will be open 5 days a week. Everything's good. And then like behind the scenes, local administrators and superintendents are like, so like, you guys can decide if it's right for you, okay? Like, because they don't want to upset Trump. It's like the best example of right-wing weakness and just how pathetic they are when it comes to Trump being a bully.
Yeah.
All right. Well, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I know we have a lot to get to.
All right. So there is one other, Trump school-related story I want to talk about, and it has to do with colleges. So Harvard and MIT are suing ICE and the Department of Homeland Security over new immigration regulations that would negatively impact foreign students who are going to universities in the United States. The rule requires foreign students to either transfer to another college or leave the country entirely if the university they're attending is holding classes online entirely through the pandemic. So the argument here by the Trump administration is, well, if you can take these classes online, there's really no reason for you to be here in the United States. So Harvard and MIT have filed a lawsuit. The suit filed in the U.S. District Court in Boston is seeking a temporary restraining order against the new rule, citing the health and safety risks of the global pandemic and claiming that ICE's decision aims to force universities to open in the fall. So the lawsuit specifically states the ability to provide remote education during the pandemic is of paramount importance to universities across the country. For many students, returning to their home countries to participate in online instruction is impossible, impracticable, prohibitively expensive and or dangerous. Sorry, I have a hard time pronouncing that word. ICE's decision reflects an effort by the federal government to force universities to reopen in-person classes, which would require housing students in densely packed residential halls, which is a great point. The effect and perhaps even the goal is to create as much chaos for universities and international students as possible. And, I agree with the language in the lawsuit. I wanted to get your thoughts on it, John.
Yeah, I see all of these efforts to try to set up situations in grade schools and now also in universities to maximize the spread of coronavirus come fall. But I want to reassure Trump, you don't need to do this, buddy. Everything else socially that the Republicans are pushing is going to ensure that there's going to be a big wave right before the election. You don't need to go above and beyond, activate challenge mode on this. Yeah, no, it's madness. It's one part, again, trying to pretend that we're not still in a pandemic. It's one part taking advantage of the pandemic to push, a longstanding immigration agenda, and also try to get people to focus on international students as some sort of boogeyman. Necessitating more international travel than we're already going to have is obviously a terrible idea during an international pandemic. It's like every angle on this is disastrous and cruel and needless and chaotic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just goes back to what we were discussing earlier, just this need to make it appear as though everything in the country is normal, there's nothing to worry about, in order to help Trump's chances of getting reelected. And there's the added layer, of course, when it comes to foreigners in the country or immigrants in the country. The right wing despises them, wants them out. And so this is a situation that I think ICE and the Department of Homeland Security and the Trump administration overall can exploit for their own, selfish purposes. And by the way, we Americans have been banned from traveling to European countries because of how poorly our federal government has dealt with coronavirus. So we're seen as like a health risk, across the country, certainly in the European Union. And yeah, I love that you brought up how it's dangerous to really do travel at a time when this pandemic is worse in terms of the numbers today than it was in the very beginning. And I do want to go to this next video because this is Donald Trump and his he's just trying to scold these universities. Let's take a look.
I see where Harvard announced that they're closing for the season or for the year. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's an easy way out. And I think they ought to be ashamed of themselves. You want to know the truth. But I noticed that today. And probably others are doing that. That's called the easy way out.
Yeah, I can assure you as someone who has some experience teaching online as opposed to in front of a classroom, it's not the easy way out. Shifting everything to online curriculum is incredibly difficult. And I'm pretty sure that university housing would like to be able to have more than 40% of the housing, rented by students. But they're not going to be able to do that. They're only going to allow 40% of the housing to be rented. And so it's just he's just so frustrating. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it.
I mean, one of my closest friends is a university professor, and all throughout this summer term, he's had to take the easy way out, which is rather than give his lecture, he has to record it solo by himself to an empty room, edit it, upload it, and then answer questions for the remainder of the week that come in via email. It's an easy way out. He loves it. Way more work. No, that's madness. And just think about the insult to injury that we have experienced, 2 months of before the pandemic hit America where Trump refused to take it seriously. A solid month of him doing absolutely nothing as it started to spread across the country. Then months of distracting us with bleach and UV lights and all of that. providing very little aid to the American people, doing literally nothing to set us up in a better position for the second wave than we were for the first. All of that, wasting the time that we had, the resources that we had. And now places like Harvard University are being forced to try to just figure out what they're going to do with the situation he's given us. And their solutions are unacceptable to Donald Trump, the guy who's had so much to do and hasn't done anything this entire way. He shouldn't, at this point, he shouldn't be commenting on any of this. He has opted out with months of lacking leadership.
Yep. Hasn't attended a single coronavirus task force meeting since April. We're now in July. So he has no interest in doing the right thing. He has no intellectual curiosity or any initiative when it comes to combating this pandemic. And it really is shameful. We do have to take a break. When we come back, I will give you multiple examples of Republicans telling you that everything's okay when it comes to coronavirus, but then their actions indicate that it is serious and they themselves are taking it seriously. We'll give you that and more when we return.
Fun tree facts with Cenk Uygur. Did you know that an acre of trees produces 52,000 pounds of oxygen every year? That's pretty badass. During 1 year, a mature tree will absorb more than 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, absorb it in, and release oxygen in exchange. Now you're wondering, Cenk, why are you telling me fun facts about trees? Guess why? Because you could plant 10 of them right now. You go to aspiration.com/TYT. Not only are they fossil fuel free, they're not going to put your money in any of that dirty stuff. They will plant 10 trees when you sign up for an account. Not only that, you'll continue to plant trees as you purchase, and they'll show you how you do that. So you save money through Aspiration, and you save the planet. You're wondering, where's the downside? Here's the trick. There is no downside. Aspiration.com/TYT. Keep your money where it is clean and help save the planet. Do it right now.
Our generation actually has a voice to say who we want.
For the first time ever, we are the biggest voting bloc in America.
One of the people we've been talking about for months and months will be the president of the United States for the next 4 years.
And for a lot of us, this is the first time that we're ever going to vote.
Do you have any idea how much of a difference 4 years makes?
The action that we take right now doesn't just affect us right now.
Discussion is important, but words aren't the only thing. You have to take action.
So that we can actually affect real change instead of just talking about it.
Get out there and take a part in making a difference.
Every voice really does matter, whether young or old, especially young people. Get out there and vote, damn it.
Now, more than ever, we can make a change.
I'm gonna vote because I want this country to be different.
I don't want the older generation to decide our future.
I want to make this world a better place for my son.
You can make change.
Vote IRL.
Vote IRL.
Vote IRL.
Vote IRL.
Vote Earl. Vote in real life.
Vote IRL.
Cool news, shoptyt.com now has books. There's a whole bunch of books there. You're going to be shocked to find out that they're largely progressive. Of course! Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People, is there. It's fantastic. It's a story from Jesse Jackson to Bernie Sanders to AOC that explains the progressive movement probably better than any book I've ever read. Speaking of awesome books, my dad's got a book out called The Original Young Turk, where he goes from the poorest olive farmer you ever met in your life to living the American dream.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power panel.
Look at this panel. You want to talk about power?
Like a smart Destiny's Child.
We're all too strong.
We start a revolution. Yes, another one.
Aren't you excited?
Wow.
Some of the best writers in the country are right here on this panel, with the obvious exception of John Irola.
Let's not so quickly discount Harry Potter fan fiction.
Most of us are usually in boxer shorts underneath.
I went with the pants today.
This is the first ever power panel with Donald Trump as president.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country.
We have to stop pretending that race is not an issue in this country.
Now keep in mind, racism had gone away until Barack Obama brought it back.
That's right. They want to protect life so much that they want to ensure that insurance companies don't cover your maternity care.
Turn your passions into potential investment opportunities. Whether it's cannabis, fashion, travel, video games, or anything in between, you tell us what you're interested in, and we'll help you uncover the investment potential. Introducing Doe, our newest partner. With Doe, you can be an owner, not just a consumer, with no fees to trade individual stocks. Doe provides your daily one-stop investment shop with lists of companies that relate to your personal interests, relevant news on your favorite stocks, and videos that unpack today's money-moving headlines in under 3 minutes. Go to doe.com/TYT and download today.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TYT. We're going to take a quick look at the thermometer. And by the way, based on what Brett told me, my birthday bonanza brought in $3,000, a little over $3,000 in donations yesterday. So thank you guys. Like seriously, it means the world to me that you allow me to do what I love and you keep this company afloat. So right now we're at $35,329. If you would like to help us out, if you'd like to keep us sustainable, please go to tyt.com/go to make that happen. I'm going to read this super chat comment and a few members' comments. This is from George or Jorge, and he says, can we address the irony in people wanting to cancel the guy who said, quote, if we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, we don't believe in freedom at all, end quote. And that was Noam Chomsky. So I wanted to just let you guys know, I don't ever plug this on the show, and I probably should do a better job. I do a show on Saturdays called Weekends with Michael Brooks. We do it for Jacobin. Please check it out. We air live every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's on the Jacobin YouTube channel. I want to address this in depth for my commentary segment. Please check it out. Please subscribe. It would mean the world to us. From the members' comments, we have the Mathematician who says, God, I love Bart and his guys creating the hilarious opening medley every day. I totally agree. They do such a great job. It shouldn't be taken for granted. Thanks, guys. Absolutely. We have incredible, talented people. And Bart, you know, by the way, Bart is an expert on music and movies. Like, incredible. Mickey C says, we'll agree to schools opening when Barron, Trump's grandchildren, and the offspring of our leaders go to public school. Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, Mickey C, because the hypocrisy is real, and the next two stories really do show that. So let's do it. The Republican governor of New Hampshire is encouraging Donald Trump to hold a campaign rally in his state, even though COVID-19 and new cases for COVID-19 continue to surge. Now, it seems like Governor Chris Sununu, though, does understand the severity of this virus based on the fact that he will, not attend. He will not attend this rally. So here's what he said. I will not be in the crowd of thousands of people. I'm not going to put myself in the middle of a crowd of thousands of people. Unfortunately, I have to be extra cautious as the governor. I try to be extra cautious for myself, my family. Oh, that's interesting. But you're not urging the people that you represent.
Yeah.
You're not urging them to take care of themselves and their families, to be extra cautious. So Sununu will not be issuing a mask mandate. States like Texas have issued a mask mandate, which is important. So if you happen to be in New Hampshire or maybe even out of state and you're considering going to this rally, in the very least, please wear a mask. But this is more of the disastrous and hypocritical nonsense that we're seeing from Republican lawmakers across the country.
I think that this is just a commitment to maintaining the metaphor of 2020. Because if you recall, in Jaws, when the mayor insists that the beaches stay open, he doesn't go swimming after that. Like, he's concerned about the economy, but he's not going to risk himself. And so, no, of course they're not going to. Fox News has been saying, everybody get back to work. We're gonna stay in our mansions, though. That would be cool. Trump's like, we don't need masks because he never comes within 100 feet of anyone who hasn't been tested in the last 24 hours. It's all very easy and very safe for them. That's the situation they've set up.
Exactly. So speaking of Trump, the Trump campaign said in its announcement of the rally that masks will be provided to attendees and that they're strongly encouraged to wear them. However, the campaign will not be requiring them to do so, which, by the way, this was similar to the rally in Tulsa. Allegedly, masks were handed out. And if you look at video of that small crowd, you'll notice that most people were not wearing masks. And also, Governor Sununu from New Hampshire told the Boston Globe the following: "I'm pleased to see the campaign will be handing out face masks and hand sanitizer to all attendees, as has been true at all public gatherings in New Hampshire where social distancing is hard to maintain. It is imperative that folks attending the rally wear masks." Now, I agree with him. That's a good statement. A good way to ensure that people are wearing masks is to issue a mandate. Yep. But he is not interested in doing that because everything coming from the right wing in this country right now in response to the pandemic is political.
And it's political, and it's cowardly, and it's fake. This morning, look, any Republican politician or Fox News host that tells people you should wear a mask, good. I know Jeanine Pirro has been posting photos of herself wearing one and getting attacked for it with conspiracy theories and all that. Hogan Gidley was on Fox and Friends this morning saying, at all of Trump's rallies, we're handing out masks and all of that. Yeah, how's that working in terms of people actually wearing them? We've seen the video. They don't. It would be very easy to get them to. Trump could go on the rally stage and say, you need to wear a mask, okay? If you're at all responsible, at all serious, if you get this whole thing I'm trying to do, you need to protect yourself and your families by wearing a mask. And they would put on a mask because that's how cults respond to dictates from their leader. He chooses not to do that, and then provides just enough one interview on the weekend where he says, I'm all for masks, but he would never ask his followers directly to do it. It's pathetic and cowardly.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Trump told the Wall Street Journal, I know I keep repeating this, but it's important to understand what goes on in his head and why he does the things he does. He told the Wall Street Journal that he believes that people wear masks to make him look bad and hurt his chances of getting reelected. So if you are the type of person who is such a fan of Donald Trump that you're motivated to go to this rally, you're not going to wear a mask because you've already, your brain has been primed to think that wearing a mask is going to make the person you want to be president for the next 4 years look bad. So, look, Trump is not a leader in any way, shape, or form. A leader doesn't just think about himself, especially someone who is supposed to be, a representative, someone who's serving the country. He's not serving the country at all. He's only thinking about how anything he does will impact him or impact his chances of getting reelected. And by the way, he just seems miserable all the time. I'm actually pretty shocked that he wants to get reelected so badly. I mean, I feel like he's in a constant state of panic and distress. Yeah. And that's been the only thing that's given me solace throughout this last, 3.5 years. But that's what's going on through his mind while people are suffering from all the bad decisions he's made. Well, let's move on to another case of a hypocritical politician. Texas is planning to hold its in-person convention despite the risks associated with the ongoing pandemic. Now, as we all know, Texas is one of the states that is experiencing a pretty devastating surge in new coronavirus cases. But what really stands out about this story is that while the Texas Republican Party insists on holding this event in person, state politicians will participate remotely. So elected officials, according to the Texas Tribune, including Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, will be giving their scheduled speeches virtually. In fact, the Texas GOP executive director, Kyle Whatley, says the following: all the elected officials are switching from a live in-person speech to videos. They're doing that for us in order to focus all the attention on the business of the meeting and to get everybody in and out of here as quickly and as safely as possible. It's a cute little excuse. No one's buying it. I'm especially not buying it, John, because if I can recall correctly, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick wanted every state to reopen immediately. He wanted the economy to reopen immediately and was very upset that as an older gentleman, he wasn't asked if he would be willing to put his life on the line to save the economy. I don't know. Do I remember that correctly? Let's watch the evidence.
No one reached out to me and said, as a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that's the exchange, I'm all in. And that doesn't make me noble or brave or anything like that. I've talked to hundreds of people, Tucker, and just in the last week, and making calls all the time. And everyone says pretty much the same thing. My message is that let's get back to work. Let's get back to living. Let's be smart about it. And those of us who are 70 plus, we'll take care of ourselves, but don't sacrifice the country.
This disease could take your life, but that's not the scariest thing to you. There's something that would be worse than dying.
Yeah.
Oh. What happened? What happened, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick? We're asking you, right? I mean, the state, the GOP's the state's GOP has decided they want to do this in-person convention. They think it's important. Isn't it Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's job to address the people, to address his party? Lead by example. We're asking you to. But of course he won't, because he knows. He knows, just like every other Republican politician in this country, that this virus is not a joke, that it could kill members of their families or kill them, considering their age. And so they have no problem risking your life, risking the lives of their own constituents, voters in their own party, to give everyone this illusion that everything's normal and everything's okay. But when it comes to their own lives, they won't take that risk. It's just pathetic.
And I'm so glad. As soon as it started to play, I remembered that video. I had forgotten about it. You're right that he's very pathetic. The idea that he would sketch out a hypothetical that no one is asking him to do and then say, is my willingness to hypothetically do this brave? I'm not saying anything. That is very pathetic. But then for Tucker Carlson to say, you'd be willing to do that, but that's not actually as scary. This thing that no one is asking you to do and you're not going to do. It's just a hypothetical you just made up. That is so brave of you. The guy who just last night was calling a woman who lost both of her legs in the U.S. military a coward thinks Dan Patrick is brave for not doing a hypothetical. What a stupid country we live in.
It's incredible. It really is. As many as 6,000 people are expected to go to this in-person convention in the state of Texas. The party's governing board met to consider moving the convention online, but it provided a resolution supporting an in-person gathering in a 40-20 vote. So 40 people voted in favor of having this in-person convention. 20 said no. After that vote, at least two groups, the Texas Medical Association and the Texas Craft Brewers Guild, interesting difference there, by the way, in the two groups, have withdrawn as sponsors for the event. Both cited safety concerns because Houston is one of the country's hotspots for the virus. So again, listen, if you're magically and miraculously on the right wing and you like to hate watch this show, even if we disagree politically, please, if you're going to go to this, don't. Just keep yourself safe, socially distance. We need to get a grasp, a handle on this virus. And it's just devastating to see people in your party, leadership in your party, not care about your life. This is the reality you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Anyway, we do have to take a break. When we come back, a pretty disastrous Supreme Court ruling that I'll share with you. And of course, more news. Come right back.
You're about to watch some behind-the-scenes footage of the Young Turks. Ooh. Now, these are partial videos. If you want to get all of them, you become a member. Go to tyt.com/join, and you'll get all the behind-the-scenes of me, Anna, John, JR, a little bit reality show like. tyt.com/join, and enjoy this.
You know what you're seeing behind me? Jersey. Hold. Watch me flip this camera. However I flip it. Do I flip it like this? No, I just took a picture. I'm bitsing right now.
What?
Behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. For members? I don't have my face on.
She doesn't have her face on, folks. Oh, that's JR's ass right there.
You can't take 5 minutes off, can you?
No, I can't, Johnny Pie. I said it was live stream, but I was lying. It's not a live stream. It's just for members. Bitsy, this is my cat. You know what his name is? Kiki Cat.
Animals are innocent. Control room and the insanity is obviously there.
Right now, as you can see, I'm directing or tech directing.
I'm so happy to be here. This is what like a Labor Day beard looks like for Cenk. Man, you're a Young Turks viewer if you recognize me like this.
Such a big fan.
Oh, thank you. You are the one person in my life I would love to meet.
What's going on, guys? This is a Bitsy or a BTS or behind the scenes with Hassan Piker, aka Woke Bay.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there.
I have finished my show, The Damage Report, and now I get into a really awkward time of the day.
When I'm sitting, the control room is right there. So I can see Bart.
And this is the Pittsburgh office, by the way. Referred to often as the boiler room.
You see how it's ripped? Is it super unprofessional to wear that at a business meeting? Or am I like cool, rebel?
I just finished doing the power panel and I'm fired up.
What do you do for TYT?
Not a whole lot.
If you're frantically tweeting at us that something's broken, thank you, because I'm fixing it.
And thank you for being a TYT member.
Super last thing, because there's always got to be a super last thing. Oh, that was disastrous. This has been behind the scenes, behind the scenes.
We're gonna do a little thing we like to call Weekly World News. Weekly World News. I cull stories from around the globe, stories that aren't covered on the main show or aren't covered enough, and I turn it into a 5-question quiz for Dave and Steve. All right, do we have our answers? A from Dave and C from Steve, and the correct answer is B, an oil tanker that sank off the coast of China. Okay, we have one answer of B and one answer of C. What is the correct answer? It is, of course, A, an airplane wing walking stunt gone wrong. Okay, we have an answer of A from Dave and C from Steve. The correct answer is B. We have an answer of B and C. What is the correct answer in true Weekly World News tradition? It's A.
Come on.
Taking the bear out for ice cream.
That can't possibly be true. We're terrible today. Just terrible.
When news is breaking and when you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time. When news breaks, when news is breaking and you like. When news is breaking and you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time for Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. This is Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich.
Climate is changing fundamentally, extremely, and non-linearly. It's becoming worse now. It's not when the levees burst that is the problem. It's in the anticipation of that.
So I hope every human being is safe. And by human beings, I do not include multinational corporations, especially the ones that started climate change in the first place.
What we're currently doing right now in cutting emissions is clearly not enough. There will be ramifications to what Trump is doing. I don't want people to suffer, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of suffering because we have an imbecile as our leader.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Anna and John with you. quick, I'm going to go through member comments. Mondo Libre says, how quickly can Biden fire Betsy DeVos? That woman is so disgusting. I think immediately. I mean, didn't Trump fire a bunch of Obama era officials immediately?
She wouldn't carry over.
No, I don't think so. No. Yeah. Dan, I am Sock writes in and says,
well,
Dan
it's
Patrick
Biden.
says,
I mean, probably she won't carry over. He could bring back some Republicans for his own administration.
I don't want to be depressed. Okay, I am Sock writes in and says, Dan Patrick says, let's get back to living as he calls for people to die to save the economy. And some super chat comments. Michael says, how can Donald Trump justify opening the schools up in the fall, but where I live in Lindsay, Canada, we're still given the option to learn from home? Well, you live in Canada, and you guys are better than us. Jenna Foster says, was going to watch TDR from today, but then saw John was on and had to watch main show on the way home instead. Okay, Jenna, I see you. I see you, girl.
Do you know what my favorite word in that is? Had to watch. No, but watch this, then watch TDR.
Too, guys.
Okay.
Lots of other news to get to. All right, I'm just kidding, Jenna. I'm super happy that you love John's show more than the show that I pour my heart and soul into every day. All right, so the Supreme Court has made a ruling that we should all be aware of, and it's infuriating. So the Supreme Court has issued another blow to the Affordable Care Act. This is in regard to an Obamacare law regulation that would force employers to give their employees health care coverage that includes free contraception. Now, this was a big controversial issue when there were debates about the Affordable Care Act, but it was an important part of the legislation because what it would do is it would lower healthcare costs, right? Unwanted pregnancies cost tens of billions of dollars in the United States. And so it was, and by the way, I mean, your employer shouldn't have any say over how you spend your money or what goes on between you and your doctor. So things aren't looking good for the Affordable Care Act. Remember, the Trump administration is also challenging the entire law and trying to repeal it through the Supreme Court. So this is not looking good, but here's what we know so far. The Supreme Court on Wednesday voted 7-2 to uphold rules established by the Trump administration that would allow employers with sincerely held moral or religious objections to deny their employees access to free contraceptive coverage. According to government estimates, the religious exemption would lead to possibly as many as 125,000 women losing their coverage. That number seems incredibly low to me, to be honest with you. I think the number is actually higher than that. But I just think it's fascinating that at a time when there is overwhelming evidence indicating that Republicans, conservatives, they don't care about our lives because they would rather send us back to schools early or reopen the economy early in the middle of a pandemic. Like, how are they making the argument that, like, no, we're pro-life and that's why we're fighting this. That's why we're doing it. No, you're not pro-life. Like, the Republican Party is not pro-life. This pandemic proves it. This pandemic proves it, period. But anyway, this just, it infuriated me because we should not be insured through our employers anyway. And the fact that corporate Democrats have fought Medicare for all or single payer healthcare so aggressively, and they kept like boasting about employer provided healthcare is infuriating because they helped to, steer us in this direction. Even though they're in favor of free contraception, it doesn't matter. When you get to the situation where employers are providing the healthcare, yeah, it gets super messy. And of course, they're going to pretend like they have religious beliefs so they don't have to provide the free contraception.
I mean, I guess I understand in terms of cover, but other than for cover, what is the purpose of the word sincerely held there? How would you establish that? How would you, like, maybe one-on-one talking to someone, you could get a sense of it. But how is the Supreme Court, after, multiple years of a case working its way up through the courts, a person going through this whole legal process, and then they stand there, you're going to tell me whether it's sincerely held or not? It's BS. It's supposed to make it seem like more than what it is, which is your opinion that you have. Except your opinion is sincerely held. It's a very deep thing. It's not like some other person who wants to discriminate against these people, but not for objectively religious reasons. It doesn't mean anything except to make it seem more impressive and sacred than what it actually is, which is the stripping away of someone's rights.
Yeah, there was a lower court ruling on this very issue, and obviously it unfortunately worked its way up to this highly conservative Supreme Court. But one of my favorite rulings was by a federal judge who argued, listen, employers pay their employees and they don't get to decide how their employees spend their own money, right? So Cenk can pay me and I can literally go spend it on cocaine and strippers like tonight. And he has no say, and he should have no say, right? That's
it's never
the money I
stopped you
work
before.
For. The benefits that come along with your place of work shouldn't be basically healthcare specifically. Like your employer does not get to decide or should not be able to decide what goes on between you and your doctor, what you decide to do health-wise, what's best for you when it comes to contraceptives. And as we know, I mean, we've covered this before in the past, birth control, yes, overwhelmingly is used for its on-label purpose, birth control. But there are plenty of people who rely on birth control for off-label uses. And the fact that these individuals will not have access to the contraceptions they need because all of these employers are going to pretend like they value lives and they think that they have a moral objection to this is infuriating. But again, all of this could be solved if we didn't have this broken system where employers provide our health care. Yeah. All right, let's move on. By the way, just real quick, I do want to note that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Sonia Sotomayor were the two Supreme Court justices who voted. They were the ones who disagreed with this majority opinion. So just something to keep in mind as we make some decisions for the upcoming general election. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is very old, and I'm terrified of her being replaced by another one of these Brett Kavanaugh types. Let's talk about mail-in voting. Donald Trump's campaign to undermine the credibility of mail-in voting has actually been sabotaged by members of his own family. And not only that, his family has been colluding with the Republican National Committee. It's the latest installment of As the White House Turns.
Made some very big mistakes. I asked for his resignation.
I'm disappointed in the Attorney General.
So we've all heard some of the nonsense coming from Donald Trump, the anti-mail-in voting conspiracy theories. Here's one example. He tweeted, "Rigged 2020 election, millions of mail-in ballots will be printed by foreign countries and others. It will be the scandal of our times." But it turns out that Trump's own son, Don Jr., and his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, have both recorded robocalls encouraging people to vote by mail. In fact, we have an example. Here's Laura Trump, Eric's painfully hosty wife.
Hi, this is Laura Trump calling from the Republican National Committee to remind you that you will soon be receiving a ballot for the congressional special election in your district taking place on Tuesday, May 12th. From my family to yours, we hope that you're all safe and healthy during this time. Now more than ever, we need strong allies like Mike Garcia in Congress to keep America great. You can safely and securely vote for Mike Garcia by returning your mail-in ballot by May 12th. He's counting on you to return your ballot by Election Day, Tuesday, May 12th. Don't let him down. Remember, your mail-in ballot is arriving soon. Make your vote count for Mike Garcia and get it in the mail by Tuesday, May 12th.
This call was paid for by the Republican National Committee and authorized by Mike Garcia for Congress.
Did she just say safely and securely?
Impossible.
You can vote by mail safely and securely? And John, as if that wasn't enough, here comes Don Jr., Trump's own son, just twisting that knife. Take a look.
This is Donald Trump Jr. calling from the Republican National Committee to remind you to return your ballot for the congressional special election in your district by Tuesday, May 12th. We're counting on you to make your voice heard by returning your ballot by Tuesday, May 12th. Don't let us down. Remember, return your ballot now. Make your vote count for Republican Mike Garcia and get it in the mail by Tuesday, May 12th. Paid for by the Republican National Committee and authorized by Mike Garcia for Congress.
You know, John, it's almost as if the Trump administration and the Trump campaign doesn't actually think that mail-in voting is an unsafe way to vote. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if they made up all that stuff about voter fraud to discourage Democrats from voting.
Almost. It's almost like, yeah, it would be one thing if it was like, hey, you know, Mike Garcia is the best. Be sure that you vote for him. You can vote, you know, in person. Maybe you could do mail. They just like mentioned it once, but they kept saying mail-in voting over and over and over again. And I have to wonder when Trump is going to realize that Don Jr. is trying to sabotage this whole thing. He's totally thrown the narrative against mail-in ballots under the bus. Just in the last week, his girlfriend got coronavirus, which is supposed to be a fake disease. That's not a threat to anyone. Why is he tearing apart all of Trump's dreams? He's never going to get that hug.
These are all good questions.
Exactly.
All good questions. I'm worried. I'm worried about the relationship, the father-son relationship here. Who knew that Don Jr. would sabotage his own father like this? It's just now, of course, in reality, the RNC, Don Jr., Laura, none of them actually think mail-in voting will lead to voter fraud. Donald Trump himself very likely doesn't think that it will lead to voter fraud. What they want to do is suppress voters as much as possible to increase the likelihood that a failing president like Donald Trump would get reelected. By the way, the RNC and other groups sued California in May, saying that an order from Gavin Newsom mailing absentee ballots to all voters ahead of the 2020 general election would lead to fraud because inactive voters automatically receive ballots, which invites fraud, coercion, theft, and otherwise illegitimate voting. So, they've actually taken some action in trying to prevent people from getting their mail-in ballots while simultaneously recording these robocalls, encouraging Republicans to go vote for that guy, Mike Garcia. So, yeah, I mean, it's just they're so transparent. And the real question is, does this type of hypocrisy and this type of voter suppression get covered effectively in the media? And I wouldn't be shocked if we were the only news show that's covering this.
Yeah, it's such a see-through ploy. And it's really like it's the perfect test of does a politician being obviously hypocritical in a very easy to identify way actually matter in terms of proving a point? And it doesn't. I mean, literally every person Trump has ever met has voted by mail. The lists are so long, you can find them. And now they're actually promoting it. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. He's still going to say that it's fake and it's fraudulent and we should totally do it. And theoretically, if he loses, he's going to bring it up as a reason that it doesn't count and all that. It's just everything is so fake.
And then one other point I want to make, we've already said that voter fraud is not a thing. It's not a problem that we're having in this country. And so there is an ultra conservative group known as the Heritage Foundation, and there's no fraud. So the 1,071 cases of fraud flagged by the Heritage Foundation spans literally decades. But if there had been 1,071 fraudulent votes in the same election, in the same state, then that still would not have been enough to change the outcome of the closest state in 2016, in the 2016 presidential election, which was Michigan. Okay, so that analysis is important. And by the way, we've shared a few examples of voter fraud that has happened. Luckily, the individuals get caught. We don't want voter fraud of any kind, but the vast majority of cases have been Republicans committing the voter fraud. So I think mail-in voting is incredibly important, especially right now when people are going to feel uncomfortable voting by mail, voting in person. They want to vote by mail. Older people deserve that right. Everyone deserves that right, but particularly people who are more vulnerable to this coronavirus. Yeah, I'm not. We have like 45 seconds left.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Myself. But no, I'll let you guys know that the post game is going to be bananas today. We are going to ask an important question about whether there are racists in California. I don't know. What do you guys think? We're going to cover that. We'll cover lots of other stories, including Peter Navarro from the Trump administration. Is he drunk or is he just weird? We answer the important questions in the postgame. Become a member. Go to tyt.com/join and make sure you subscribe to Damage Report. That's John's show. It's absolutely fantastic, to the point that some of the members only want to watch that. We'll see you soon.
They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
We don't run our own country. We've lost our democracy, and all we have left is rage.
Where are the Democrats? I would be on every cable news channel screaming and yelling and talking about what the Republicans are doing right now.
How do you expect us to get excited to show up to the polls for these loser Democrats? How come we have nothing but cowards who'll never fight? Primaries are everything.
Building a great wall on the southern border.
You have politicians who fearmonger about disenfranchised groups.
The first attacker came through the visa lottery.
Now they are against legal immigrants.
Ending chain migration.
They don't want people from those countries coming here because they're fucking racist. This guy's an absolute monumental disgrace to all of us as Americans.
Stop treating us like animals and bugs and start treating us with some respect.
That is what I was warning about for literally years on this program. This is what they promised they would do if they got into power, and what do you know? They did it.
I've now shown dozens of videos on the Young Turks of cops handcuffing people who are bleeding to death. His life means nothing. We have been trained to be cowards, so we're going to handcuff that guy bleeding to death.
When it comes to these protesters who are justifiably enraged at members of their community getting gunned down and murdered by police force.
We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd.
They said that this was impossible, but now we're beginning to move that boulder. And at the end, we'll get our democracy back. Primary the living hell out of these Democrats, and let's take over the party. That's a ghost ship. Let's board it, and let's take it.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning. Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're going to get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
I love the post game. I just feel so relaxed once we get to the post game, because even though we're going to cover stories, it's just, I've said this before, it's like we're among family, you know? You guys are the. So John, before we went live again, you mentioned something that you had read and it was interesting. So can you just set it up for us?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about how Japan has really cut down their coronavirus cases, and I figured out why. It's this headline: Japan's theme parks have banned screaming on roller coasters because it spreads coronavirus. Quote, please scream inside your heart. To which I replied, I am.
Every day. No, I love that. Okay. So I don't know if you're able to be on a roller coaster and not scream, like it's a very human instinct, right? To scream because it's scary. But if you can do that, I guess, if you can avoid screaming, cool. It's just that last line, scream inside your heart, that like makes this hilarious.
Do you think that screaming when you're scared is a learned behavior? Because it has never occurred to me on something like a roller coaster to open my mouth and begin making noise. That just seems like such a weird thing.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on this at all. I just know that I feel the need to scream when I'm scared. When, you're doing that, when you do like the.
Oh yeah.
I hate that feeling.
Wait,
it's like, no, I don't want this to happen.
The anticipation?
The anticipation's horrible. Horrible. It's like,
okay.
And then there's that like that short period of time that feels like a lifetime when you're at the very top, just before you're about to like whoosh.
Yeah.
And then I scream, like it comes out naturally.
Yeah.
But okay, so the thing I want to bring up though is there's a lot of talk about theme parks reopening in the United States. And luckily, Disneyland in California has decided to avoid opening. They were going to open on July 17th. And now they're like, no, that's too early. We don't know when we're going to open. So it'll be closed indefinitely. But in Florida, they're going to open Disney World because of course they are. And I don't know if they're going to implement actual social distancing rules or anything like that. But like, I've been to Disney World way too many times. I hate it there. It's already terrible. Disney World is already terrible. Why would anyone want to go when it's even more terrible? You know what I mean? Like the lines are going to be longer because you need to be like, you got to step away. Like you can't be close to one another. I don't know what other rules there are going to be, but like, it's not, to me, it's not worth it because it's so expensive to go. Disney World is insanely expensive because it's like four different. Land? Disneyland is 2 theme parks, right? So Disneyland, California Adventure, which by the way, I personally like California Adventure more than Disneyland. Whereas in Disney World, Epcot is the only thing that's worth going to, my personal opinion, but there's 4 parks. And so if you go, obviously you want to experience all the parks, especially if it's your first time, that'll run you like each park's at least $100. So it's like $400. And then with tax and all that other stuff, it's expensive. It's really expensive to go. Why spend that money to be miserable? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've only been to land once and it was right before the pandemic, but I liked it. I like the idea of someday going back. It doesn't seem like it's going to be any time in the future. Because just when they say they're ready to serve customers, I'll be the judge of that. I'm going to wait a couple of months, but yeah, we'll see. I know Edwin, that dude loves Disneyland. He has got to be dying from an inability to go right now.
Oh, people love Disneyland and Disney World. It's like people love Disney, and I get it. And it is fun when you go with adults. That's it. Like you can't go to any Disney theme park with children and expect to have a good time.
Yeah.
Anyway, with that said though, let's talk about racists. Because some interesting stuff happened in California recently, and you should know about it. So, a video has emerged of a Silicon Valley CEO. He's the CEO of Solid 8, which I think is an online security company. Doesn't matter. But his name is Michael Lofthouse. And this video is pretty disturbing because as he was in Carmel at a really fancy place that I would love to experience one day called the Bernardus Lodge, he decided to say some pretty terrible things in a rant to a group, the Chan family specifically. So just want to give you guys a warning. The language is disturbing. It's disgusting. But there is a point in covering this. So let's take a quick look.
Yeah, say that again. Oh, now you're shy?
Say it again.
Say it again. Now you're shy?
What's wrong with you, man?
Say it one more time.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry, you need to leave.
Yeah,
you need to leave. That is not appropriate.
Trump's
You
gonna
need to leave now.
need to leave.
Oh, you do not talk to our
you
guests
need
like
to
that.
leave. What's wrong
You need to leave now.
Asian piece of shit.
Oh my
Right
God.
now. Get out of here.
Yeah, I'm out.
Get out. You are not allowed here.
I already put my
No, do
money
not
down.
talk to our guests like that. Get out now.
Who are these?
They are valued guests.
Oh, are they?
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Get out.
valued guests.
Yeah, f you. You're a racist.
You are not allowed here ever.
Yeah, really.
I love that waitress. They
Yeah.
are valued guests. I love
Yeah.
that. That was awesome. So he, of course, goes on this like anti-Asian rant, and then this happened on the 4th of July. And the video started getting attention on July 7th because Kelly Clarkson tweeted about it. And apparently it wasn't even an isolated incident. So once that video went viral, Lofthouse continued on his anti-Asian, rant online. So I'm going to share a quick example of that for you. This is on social media, on Instagram specifically. So Ahmed Omer wrote, everyone is well aware of the situation that happened out in Monterey. You are a trash human being and you deserve every bad thing that happens to you. And then, look, we had to censor it, but he then goes on to say more racist, anti-Asian things in a vulgar way. And so after there was enough backlash, of course, he decided to apologize. And so I'll read you his apology. This was while he was interviewed by a local TV station, KSBW. He says, "My behavior in that video was appalling. This was clearly a moment where I lost control and made incredibly hurtful and divisive comments. I would like to deeply apologize to the Chan family. I can only imagine the stress and pain they feel. I was taught to respect people of all races, and I will take the time to reflect on my actions and work to better understand the inequality that so many of those around me face." So look, I get annoyed at people who think Silicon Valley is like some progressive utopia and that these are all like super left-wingers. They're not. And I get equally annoyed when people think that Californians, like there's no such thing as racism in California. I will tell you, there is definitely racism everywhere in this country, including in California. All you need to do is join the Nextdoor app in your local community, and you'll know that there's a problem with racism everywhere in this country, regardless of how liberal that area is.
Yeah, there's even specific forms of racism that seem to sprout up specifically in places that feel like they're not racist. Like we've moved past that. We're good. And then dark stuff is coming down the road after that in terms of their behavior. Yeah, watching that guy, his excuse that he lost control. So only control was stopping you from doing that previously, from shouting slurs and talking about Trump having sex with them and stuff like that. But what I find interesting is that over the past few months, we've had different sorts of outbursts. Usually, sometimes about race, about masks and things like that. You have the people who clearly have mental illness. It's being sort of flavored by this stuff. But these are people who have obviously mental problems. You have the like, I feel threatened guy. The like, I'm freed up to be this aggressive meathead or whatever. And then you have that guy who I almost find more troubling because he was so like quietly confident that even with a phone pointed at him, that even after all that we've been through, all that we've seen, he can say whatever he wants. He can just assert it. It's fine. He's still better than all of these people. Like the meathead is totally out of control. But this guy, he thinks that he's the slickest thing ever as he is being filmed shouting racial slurs and swears at a family that's just trying to have a meal.
No, and by the way, after the fact, he goes on social media and just repeats some of that disgusting rhetoric. Well, look, he is, again, from Silicon Valley, a Californian. And so one other person had some thoughts about race issues in California, and that's Peter Navarro. So Peter Navarro works in the Trump administration. And he, in a very strange way, felt the need to talk about how we've conquered racism in this country. And so let's hear his argument and see if it's persuasive.
My awakening on the race issue was when I was 8 years old in a Woolworths store in West Palm Beach, Florida, when I walked over and I took a drink from the colored water fountain because I wanted to see colored water. And this woman came up to me and just gently said, you can't drink from that. And I go, why? She says, that's for colored people. And it was like, oh yeah, I'm 8 years old, and that didn't make any sense to me. And so none of this racial divisions have made any sense to me. And I'm a Californian. We don't see race out there. So it's like I live my life in a race blind world, and it troubles me. It troubles me that we have so much of this discussion when in fact we've got real problems in this country.
I thought he was going to pull Leon Cooperman there. It troubles me.
That was so ridiculous. He's, by the way, not a Californian. He, by the way, like we showed you, like there are race issues throughout this country, and California is not some like racism-free utopia. But by the way, just to give you a background on Peter Navarro, I mean, he works for the Trump administration. It's not far-fetched for him to be a liar, but he's originally from Massachusetts, and he grew up in Maryland and Florida. So not a California.
He did apparently live in Laguna Beach for a while, though.
Of course he did.
So total pass. Yeah, I'm race blind. I don't see race. That doesn't tell us anything about what he really believes about race. And then immediately transitions to, and that's why it troubles me that we're having these discussions when there are real problems. You're race blind. You believe that any discussion of, racial inequity, police brutality, all of that is a distraction from real issues. That is the clearest example of what someone really means when they say that they're race blind, honestly. That was a pretty revealing quote from Peter Navarro there.
Let's move on to a revealing interview on Fox and Friends, something that kind of surprised me. So Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade, of all people, actually decided to have a moment of clarity and pushed back on some of the propaganda coming from White House spokesperson Hogan Gidley. So Hogan Gidley, like any other Trump administration official, is interested in, revisionist history and pretending as if the situation that we're dealing with right now, with the pandemic, for instance, the civil unrest, not a big deal at all. In fact, why don't we hear what Hogan Gidley had to say exactly, and then how Brian Kilmeade pushed back a little bit.
We don't have the video. Sorry.
Oh, shoot. Okay. We don't have the video. It's all right. Basically, Hogan Gidley. Wait, do we? No? Okay. Hogan Gidley claimed that that Americans are better off today than they've ever been. And Brian Kilmeade was like, huh? Really? But the pandemic, more than 130,000 Americans have already died. We actually hit a pretty devastating milestone with more than 3 million confirmed coronavirus cases in the country, and the number is likely much higher. There's just devastation all around. The first reported case came on January 21st. Within 99 days, 1 million Americans became infected. It took just 43 days after that to reach 2 million cases, and 28 days later, the U.S. reached 3 million cases of the novel coronavirus Wednesday, so the Wednesday of this week. And then when you look at our economic situation, it's not good for the vast majority of average Americans. So within the Fortune 500 companies, This is what's led to the inequality. 91 profitable corporations such as Amazon, FedEx, Netflix, and General Motors paid no U.S. corporate income taxes in 2018, and that's according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And 379 profitable Fortune 500 corporations paid just 11.3% tax rate. So I bring that up because, yes, that has further, it's definitely involved in the inequality that we're seeing in the country. But these companies that didn't pay anything in taxes got massive bailouts in the middle of the pandemic, while we, average Americans, if we were lucky, got a one-time check of $1,200, and maybe you qualified for unemployment if you live in a state that actually has the infrastructure to deal with the high volume of unemployment claims. But it's just been a disaster. And by the way, those unemployment benefits from the federal government are going to run out by the end of this month.
So you are admitting that, like Hogan Gidley said, these companies are doing better than they were 3 years ago.
Well, if he's only talking about corporations and the wealthy, they're doing well. They're doing well. We have a record number of billionaires in this country, nearly 800 billionaires in the United States.
Yeah. Yay. So the interaction between them was really interesting because, of course, Brian Kilmeade, he does occasionally he'll question them a little bit more than most people on Fox. He also says horrible things. We covered one of those earlier in the show today. But it's not like Brian Kilmeade doesn't want Trump to get reelected. He definitely does. He just wants their strategy to be a little bit more nuanced than, oh, forget the pandemic, everybody's doing better than they were 3 years ago. He reacted the way a normal person would, at least in that moment, saying, well, you can't really say that. I mean, the pandemic, the economic damage, it's not really growing the way that he was just saying, hey, could you finesse this a little bit? Could you show a minimum of empathy for not only the 130,000 people who've died, but the millions who've experienced the coronavirus, the many times that millions of family members and friends who've been worried that they're about to lose someone, the tens of millions who've lost their jobs. Could you consider some of these? That is a significant percentage of the entire American public is demonstrably not better off just in the past few months. And we understand that they blame Trump in large part. Many of these people do for his lack of action. Could you just finesse that a bit? And Hogan Gidley refused to do that. He said, no, they're wrong. They're better off than they were 3 years ago.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you would hear from any dictatorial regime, right? I mean, it reminds me of North Korea and the propaganda that comes from their state media. It's just devastating. It's complete gaslighting. And we have so much poverty, so many devastating issues in this country that have worsened under the Trump administration. And to hear someone pretend as if things are great while we're seeing civil unrest, we're seeing how this pandemic is just devastating the lives of so many Americans. The economic situation is not good. When you see all these things happening simultaneously, and it's just insulting for anyone to pretend as if Donald Trump has done anything good during his administration, during his first term. The one thing that people will cite time to time is that he did some criminal justice reform early on, but he regretted that. He said that, he thought it was a bad idea that he listened to Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and passed criminal justice reform. And then he said that he was going to essentially lean into the defending the police and divisive racist language. And he did. Immediately after I read that story, he did. He definitely started attacking Black Lives Matter more aggressively. So
yeah, that's the strategy.
Well, that is, because that's all he can do. I mean, he hasn't delivered on anything. He hasn't delivered when it comes to trade. He hasn't delivered when it comes to the wall on the southern border. He hasn't delivered on improving the economic situation for his constituents, for his voters. Like, he hasn't done any of that. So all he can do is go back to the 2016 playbook and latch on to what unfortunately worked out for him, which was the racist, divisive language. All right. Well, since we're talking about protesters, I think it's important to address this story, even though it's really horrible. And yeah. Okay. So peaceful protesters are being run over by cars, and the fact that they're being targeted should be a massive story for everyone, but apparently it isn't. So in recent days, one person was killed in Seattle, and 2 people were injured in Bloomington, Indiana. Dozens of similar incidents have occurred across the United States. So we're talking about peaceful protesters and the violence that they're dealing with by people who disagree with their speech, with people who disagree with their political beliefs. This is the type of story that I would expect the free speech warriors to care about, because not only is this horrible violence, just disgusting on its own, but it's supposed to go against what our constitutionally protected rights indicate. We're supposed to be able to peacefully protest. So there was a situation on Saturday where a man drove past a police barricade on a closed stretch of the Seattle highway. And at that point, the car hit 2 protesters, one of whom died. His car struck 32-year-old Diaz Love and 24-year-old Summer Taylor, sending them flying into the air as people screamed. Love was hospitalized in serious condition. Taylor died that night. Protesters were also similarly injured in New York and Indiana by protesters who authorities say appeared to deliberately target the demonstrators. And that's important, deliberately attacking them. This is just hideous behavior, disgusting. These people should be, prosecuted. In Indiana, for instance, a man in an SUV swerved around police barriers and into a crowd of protesters on a bridge, hitting and dragging 23-year-old Trevor Davis, who was hospitalized. 2 days after that, on Monday night, a driver plowed into protesters in front of a courthouse in Bloomington, Indiana, before speeding away with 2 people desperately clinging to the roof of the car, causing them to fly off. I know, it's amazing. And how many nonstop stories did we see about the looters and look at all the property damage that's happening while these protests go on? Of course, that has nothing to do with the protests. Of course, that was meant to distract from the important message of the protesters. But why isn't this a story that is being covered nonstop? The looters are being covered nonstop. And in this case, we're talking about human lives. I'll read one more graphic for you. A demonstrator in Bloomington, Indiana, and 2 others in Huntington Station on New York's Long Island were hurt Monday evening during peaceful protests, police said. So this is happening all over the country. It's a serious problem. And I think that it's important to protect these protesters and raise awareness about what's going on. And also keep in mind that there have been local politicians in various states. I remember reading about proposed legislation in North Dakota that would literally protect people who run over protesters if the protesters are on the street.
Yeah.
Luckily, that was defeated, but it gives you a sense of where people's minds are at. Republican lawmakers thinking that kind of behavior is okay and should be protected through legislation.
And even if they don't think that it'll pass, they know that bringing it up will be popular with their base, which loves, at the very least, joking about running over protesters, but they like the idea that they might theoretically have the option to do it. The fact that people aren't reporting on this nearly enough, that look, I've talked about multiple of those cases, but you mentioned at least one that I hadn't even noticed, because it is hard to find these in some cases. You would think it wouldn't be. It's not even like it's not exciting enough for the news. It's literally the far right taking up ISIS tactics to try to kill people all over the country in multiple cities in a short span of time. How could that not be a story? But of course, it's not a story because many of these outlets just don't want to give any airtime to the protesters. Fox News spent the first, 2-3 weeks of all of this saying, hey, you're supposed to protest in the right way. This is violent. You're burning things down. That's why we won't listen to you. You have to be peaceful. And then as soon as it's peaceful, except for the targeting of them by others, they don't care about it. They're not. What is Fox finally covering their demands because they're being peaceful now? No, it's all disingenuous.
Of course. I mean, we knew that when peaceful protests were happening by members of the NFL, and they were constantly attacked by Republicans and by Donald Trump for kneeling during the national anthem. Yeah. It's just, of course, it's disingenuous, and it gives you a sense of where people's values are And, for all the nonsense that we hear about Republicans being pro-life, their actions certainly don't prove that. It doesn't really play out in real life, unless it comes to controlling a woman's body. That's the only time they pretend like they care about life. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's all we have for devastating and depressing stories today. But John, you're the best as always. Thank you for doing the show with me.
Anytime.
All right. I think that's it. You guys have a great night. Make sure you check out. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Tomorrow, the Damage Report. You should tune in no matter what. So please just do that. But especially tomorrow, my co-host for the entirety of the episode, Benjamin Dixon. So it should be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Have a great night, everyone. And we'll see you tomorrow.